Roberta Sajiasi grew up in the small town of Vasto, in the province of Chieti, Abruzzo, southeastern Italy. Her parents, along with most of her extended family, also lived there. She shared a particularly close bond with her mother. They confided in each other and were always in touch. From a young age, Roberta was known for her outgoing nature, kind heart, and cheerful personality. She excelled as a student and developed a deep passion for cooking, particularly showcasing her talent in baking pies and cakes. She was well liked by her peers and cherished spending time with her many friends. After completing public school, Roberta enrolled in Italy's School of Hospitality and Culinary Arts. At the age of 20, she began working at the most renowned bakery in her hometown, owned by the Lello family. Every family member participated in the bakery's operations, and Roberta became close friends with Fabio di Lello, the younger son, who was her age and worked alongside her. Spending so much time together, their friendship quickly blossomed into a romantic relationship. Both families were very supportive of they. Roberta's parents took an immediate liking to Fabio, and Fabio's parents admired Roberta for her strong work ethic and sense of responsibility. By the age of 25, Roberta and Fabio had moved in together, sharing a rented apartment while saving money to buy their own home. Fabio, a passionate and dedicated soccer player since childhood, had achieved notable success. He served as the captain of the city's soccer team and performed impressively in amateur tournaments. In 2014, he made his debut in Serie D, the highest amateur soccer division under the Italian National League Federation. In 2015, Roberta and Fabio achieved a milestone in their lives. That autumn, they celebrated their wedding with a grand ceremony and moved into a spacious and cozy house of their own. They were overjoyed and excited about their future, making plans they were eager to fulfill, plans that would tragically never come to fruition. On the morning of Friday, July the 1st, 2016, Roberta, then 34, called her mother, as she did every day. She suggested having dinner that evening at her parents' house, intending to gather everyone there to share exciting news. Keeping the announcement a surprise, she planned to reveal it at dinner and agreed with her mother to prepare the meal and set the table together. Around 2 p.m., Roberta left her house on her scooter, heading to her parents' home, just a few kilometers away, a trip that usually took about 10 minutes. Tragically, Roberta never arrived. While passing through one of the busiest intersections in town and carefully obeying traffic rules, a Fiat Punto sped through a red light from the opposite lane and collided violently with her scooter. The car then crashed into another vehicle. The force of the impact threw Roberta into a metal pole and onto the sidewalk. She sustained a severe, traumatic brain injury, lost a significant amount of blood, and was barely alive by the time emergency services arrived. Paramedics were astonished that Roberta was still alive, given the extent of her injuries. She was rushed to the nearest hospital and immediately taken into surgery. Despite the efforts of the top surgeons, who worked tirelessly for nearly an hour, her injuries were simply too severe. Roberta passed away without regaining consciousness. The drivers of the other two vehicles involved in the crash suffered only minor injuries and did not require hospitalization. The driver of the Fiat Punto was identified as 21-year-old local resident Italo De Lisa. He remained at the scene visibly shaken and did not attempt to flee. He waited for the police to arrive, cooperated fully, and explained what had happened. He admitted he had briefly taken his eyes off the road and failed to notice the traffic light turning red. By the time he realized, it was too late to avoid the collision. After hitting Roberta's scooter, he panicked, swerved into oncoming traffic, and struck another car. He willingly handed over his documents and underwent a toxicology screening at the hospital, which confirmed that he was not under the influence of alcohol or any banned substances. Witnesses and officers noted his profound remorse. Upon learning later that Roberta had not survived, he was overcome with distress and nearly collapsed. Fabio was the first to hear the devastating news. He rushed to the hospital just minutes after his wife, Roberta, had been brought in. In the hallway, he broke down, crying and praying, desperately pleading for updates from every doctor and nurse who entered or left the operating room. About 30 minutes later, the surgeon came out and, after a pause, informed Fabio that they had done everything possible, but Roberta could not be saved. Fabio's reaction was heartbreaking. Stunned and in denial, he repeatedly begged to see Roberta, clinging to the hope that there had been some mistake. But the truth was inescapable. She had passed away. As the reality sunk in, Fabio was overtaken by grief and anger. Overwhelmed, he reportedly wanted to confront the person responsible immediately. Hospital staff had to physically restrain him and escort him to a private room where he was given a sedative to calm down. At the same time, Italo, the driver responsible for the crash, was deeply shaken, repeatedly saying he didn't deserve forgiveness. Meanwhile, Roberta's parents were growing anxious. Their daughter was overdue and not answering her phone. They began calling Fabio, who initially didn't pick up. When he finally answered, he tearfully broke the tragic news. Within 15 minutes, both Roberta's and Fabio's families gathered at the hospital, struggling to process the devastating loss. Their vibrant and joyful lives, filled with dreams and plans, had been shattered in an instant. Instead of celebrating Roberta and Fabio's upcoming anniversary, they were now faced with the unimaginable task of saying goodbye to her. Roberta was laid to rest on July 3, 2016, just 2 months before what would have been her and Fabio's first wedding anniversary. The farewell took place in the same church where they had recently pledged their love and commitment. The priest who officiated their wedding also led this deeply somber memorial service. The small church overflowed with mourners. So many people came that not everyone could fit inside. Roberta was beloved and well respected in her community, and friends, neighbors, and colleagues gathered to honor her memory and support her grieving family. The tragedy left the entire town in shock. Few could believe she was truly gone. The man responsible for the fatal crash, Italo, did not flee the scene. He cooperated fully and underwent medical testing at the hospital. He was completely sober and had no history of mental illness or emotional instability. The crash happened at a busy intersection, equipped with multiple traffic cameras. The police reviewed footage from 4 different angles, clearly capturing the accident. Investigators also retrieved surveillance videos showing the routes both drivers took prior to the crash. The footage revealed that both vehicles had adhered to traffic laws and speed limits. However, at the crucial moment, Italo failed to stop at a red light. He drove through the intersection, colliding with the scooter Roberta was riding. After hitting Roberta, Italo's Fiat Punto struck another car coming from the opposite direction. Fortunately, the driver of the second car was not seriously injured, and his vehicle damage was covered by insurance, so he did not pursue legal action. Tragically, Roberta's injuries were far too severe to be treated. Italo expressed his deep regret, claiming he had been distracted for just a moment. Despite his regret, nothing could ease the pain of Roberta's loved ones, particularly Fabio, who struggled to suppress his anger toward the man responsible. The 21-year-old driver, Italo, was arrested and formally charged with involuntary harm, causing fatal injuries. He was placed in pre-trial detention while awaiting the court proceedings. He did not contest the charges, declaring that he was ready to accept any punishment imposed. Fabio closely followed every development in the investigation. He meticulously reviewed all available evidence and met with detectives daily in his search for answers and any additional leads. Fabio strongly rejected the official findings, convinced that Italo or his family had influenced the authorities to minimize his responsibility for the accident. Fabio believed the crash was caused by substance use and was determined to keep the case in the public eye. Fabio organized protests and marches, demanding full accountability from Italo for the fatal accident. Many people, especially those who had known Roberta, supported him. Fabio also launched an aggressive online campaign against Italo and his family, accusing him of intentional misconduct, banned substance use, and claiming that his relatives had bribed officials to tamper with the toxicology report. His social media posts, filled with accusations and cries for justice appeared daily. On July 15, 2016, Fabio organized a memorial march for Roberta, attended by hundreds, carrying her photos and signs demanding justice. Fabio's rhetoric grew more intense, threatening further demonstrations and even suggesting, during emotional outbursts, that he might take matters into his own hands if the authorities failed to act. His increasingly confrontational tone stirred public outrage but also alarmed Italo's family, who began fearing for their safety. Fabio's hostility toward Italo was evident as he worked to sway public opinion against him. Fabio's actions hinted at a willingness to disregard the law to seek retribution. In response, Italo's family filed for a court order to protect themselves, citing Fabio's harassment and threats. The case remained under investigation with incomplete evidence, but the situation was becoming dangerously volatile and required urgent legal action. On July 20th, Fabio was issued a court order barring him from accusing Italo of a crime, inciting hatred, posting harmful content online, or encouraging hostility toward Italo or his family. Fabio complied, but abruptly withdrew from public advocacy, leaving others unsettled by his silence. Every day, Fabio visited the grave of his late wife, Roberta, bringing fresh flowers. He spent hours there, sometimes standing silently, other times kneeling, crying, or praying. His family, hoping he just needed time to grieve, chose not to intervene, but his behavior only escalated. Fabio erected a memorial at the accident site and turned Roberta's gravesite into a detailed tribute with photos from their happiest moments. He began spending entire days at the cemetery. He quit soccer, his lifelong passion, and stopped going to work. Nothing seemed to matter to Fabio anymore. His life revolved around the flower-covered grave. He ate little, lost significant weight, and looked pale and exhausted. Within weeks, he appeared drastically older, withdrawn from others. Fabio grew disconnected from reality. One morning, cemetery staff found Fabio at Roberta's grave before opening hours. He had climbed the fence overnight, saying he needed to be close to her. He told relatives he couldn't bear staying in their home, filled with memories of Roberta. Only at her gravesite did he feel any peace. Fabio spoke to her as though she was still alive, refusing to refer to her in the past tense. Fabio's older brother suggested a brief trip to Rome to help him clear his head, but Fabio refused, insisting he couldn't leave Roberta alone in the cemetery. This was a clear sign that Fabio needed more than the support of loved ones. He required urgent professional psychiatric care. Fabio's brother and other family members dismissed his concerning words and erratic behavior, believing time would heal him. Unfortunately, they were tragically wrong. Meanwhile, the parents of Italo, who was still in custody, hired a top attorney to defend their son. The lawyer was confident from the start, highlighting that Italo had no prior criminal record, rarely broke traffic laws, and tested sober at the time of the incident. While the attorney admitted that running a red light was a mistake, he argued there was no evidence to support serious charges, such as premeditated intent. He also pointed out that Italo had followed the speed limit throughout his drive, and it remained unclear what had distracted him. To support their case, the defense presented character testimonials from Italo's school and workplace, as well as evidence of his volunteer work in environmental causes and his enrollment in firefighter training courses. Italo had planned to dedicate himself to public service after finishing his certification exams. During the trial, the defense submitted surveillance footage showing Roberta on her scooter without a helmet, which violated safety regulations. The attorney argued that wearing a helmet could have lessened the severity of her injuries and perhaps even saved her life. Considering this footage, Italo's clean record, and Roberta's safety oversight, the court modified his pre-trial conditions. He was released under judicial supervision shortly before Christmas 2016, with the final decision scheduled for February 2017. Other than a few restrictions, Italo resumed a normal life. When Fabio learned that the man responsible for the accident had been released, he was consumed by rage. In court, he shouted and tried to physically confront Italo and Italo's attorney. Family members struggled to hold him back, and the judge ordered him to be removed from the courtroom. After Italo's release, Fabio became sleepless, angry, and withdrawn. He spent countless hours by Roberta's grave, talking to her as if she was still alive. Despite Fabio's worsening mental state, his family did not seek professional help. They thought he just needed more time to heal. When they suggested seeing a mental health specialist, Fabio reacted with hostility. He began accusing the justice system of being corrupt and incapable of delivering a fair outcome. When Italo was allowed to await trial out of custody, Fabio completely lost faith in the law. He decided to take matters into his own hands, but didn't reveal his plans to anyone. His behavior shifted noticeably. He became increasingly secretive and withdrawn. Fabio had an interest in firearms dating back to his youth. He regularly visited shooting ranges and, in 2006, obtained a firearm license, purchasing a 9mm pistol that he kept secured in a safe at home. Now consumed by thoughts of vengeance, he started handling the weapon often, convinced that it was his only means of achieving justice. As New Year's approached, Fabio's social media activity took a dark turn. He began posting about justice, revenge, and reflections on life's meaning, lamenting how his own life had lost purpose. These posts were deeply troubling, but sadly, they went unnoticed. In January, Fabio began secretly following Italo to avoid drawing attention. Fabio observed his daily routines, the places he visited, and the people he interacted with. Using this information, Fabio devised a plan. On February 1, 2017, he took a loaded pistol and went to a bar on Via Perth, a location Italo frequented and close to his home. Fabio entered the bar to confirm Italo was there. After spotting him, he left quietly and found a discreet location nearby to wait. Around 9:30 p.m., Italo exited the bar, chatted briefly with friends, and was about to head home. At that moment, Fabio confronted him. Italo sensed something was wrong, and both men froze briefly. Then Fabio pulled out his pistol and fired 3 shots at close range. The first shot struck Italo in the abdomen, the second near his heart, and the third, a headshot, ensured there was no chance of survival. Fabio, an experienced marksman, executed the act with precision, leaving no room for error. Afterward, Fabio walked calmly to his car. Witnesses, shocked by what they had seen, were too afraid to intervene, knowing he likely wouldn't hesitate to use the weapon again. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but Italo was pronounced dead at the scene. Police interviewed witnesses and were able to identify Fabio as the perpetrator. When officers went to his house, he wasn't there. Fabio's family, upon learning what happened, informed police of where he was likely headed. Authorities intercepted him on his way to the cemetery. Fabio had planned to end his life at Roberta's grave after what he believed was an act of justice over her death. However, police arrived before he could carry out the plan. He didn't resist arrest, showed no emotion, and openly admitted to the crime. At the police station, Fabio broke down. He spoke of his intense love for his wife, Roberta, and his anger with the justice system for allowing Italo to walk free after the car accident that killed her. Then he revealed an even deeper motive. Roberta had been pregnant. Though it was still early in the pregnancy, they had discovered the news just one day before the fatal crash. Roberta had planned to surprise their families with the announcement during dinner, a moment that never came. The accident had taken both her and their unborn child. Fabio said his actions were retaliation for the loss of not just his wife, but also the future they were building. He expressed that he had nothing left to live for, wanting only to reunite with his family. After his arrest, Fabio was sent for psychiatric evaluation. Doctors diagnosed him with acute psychological trauma caused by profound grief. However, the court determined that Fabio had acted deliberately and with full awareness of his actions. He was charged with first-degree premeditated murder. While awaiting trial, Fabio made several attempts to harm himself and was placed under strict supervision. On March 24, 2017, he was found guilty and sentenced to 30 years in prison. Fabio showed no emotion during the verdict, appearing detached from the moment. His family and legal team appealed the sentence, which was later reduced to 20 years. In prison, Fabio reportedly turned to religion for some solace, but never fully recovered from the loss of his wife and unborn child. Diaz met Jared James Deacus while working at Cheppy's Meat Market, a local grocery store in Taqueria, Texas. At the time, Angi was a 21-year-old immigrant from Nicaragua who had come to the U.S. seeking a better life for herself and her family. Jared, also 21, had recently started working at the same store. The two quickly grew close. Angi is impressed with Jared's friendly personality and hard-working spirit, which harmonizes well with her responsibility and maturity, as she is the eldest of 4 siblings. During their work breaks, they would talk and laugh about their dreams and future plans. To her, Jared is a reliable support and brings her comfort, having left Nicaragua and her family behind, particularly her mother, who was battling cancer. Angi longed for someone to share her struggles and aspirations with. Her devotion to her family and determination to provide for them drove her to work multiple jobs, and Jared's companionship filled her with hope. Their friendship at work soon blossomed into a romantic relationship. Outside of work, they grew closer by sharing meals and discussing their goals. To those around them, Angi and Jared seemed like a happy and loving young couple, trying to build a future together in America. She had recently achieved a significant personal goal, becoming a fitness coach, a testament to her dedication and perseverance. Angi's co-workers at Cheppy's Meat Market often remarked on her joy when she was with Jared. Her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noted how she would brighten up when talking about him and described her as being incredibly happy in her relationship. However, as their relationship became more serious, small changes in Angi's behavior began to indicate that not everything was going smoothly. While these shifts were initially dismissed as normal life stresses, they began to raise concerns among her loved ones. Jared proposed to Angi after months of dating, and she was thrilled to accept. Marriage symbolized not just love, but also stability and partnership, which Angi hoped would help her continue supporting her family in Nicaragua. Their engagement was full of excitement as they planned for their future. On October 22, 2022, they tied the knot in a wedding ceremony officiated by Waller County Judge Trey Duhon, who later described them as a kind and loving young couple. Friends and family came together to celebrate what seemed to be the start of a happy, secure future for the pair. After their wedding, Angi and Jared decided to move into a small cabin on Jared's parents' property on Oak Hollow Boulevard in Waller County, Texas. This provided affordable housing as they worked on building their financial foundation as a couple. For Angi, who regularly sent money back to Nicaragua, the arrangement was practical. She balanced her job at Cheppy's Meat Market with her fitness coaching career, earning consistent praise from her manager, Ruth Armendariz, for her dedication and positive attitude. Co-workers described her as hardworking, energetic, and highly ambitious. However, cracks began to show in their seemingly happy relationship. While Angi kept up her cheerful persona, her boss, Veronica Jimenez, noticed subtle changes. Veronica recalled that some days Angi seemed different, explaining that she appeared tired, though it wasn't clear whether it was because of work or her relationship. Jared's arrest for driving under the influence just a month into their marriage was the first major warning sign. The incident occurred at a Whataburger restaurant, where employees called the police after Jared became aggressive and tried to force his way inside. Responding officers described him as belligerent and locked him out of the building. During a search of his car, police found a partially full bottle of Bud Light. Jared admitted to taking pills but couldn't specify the medication. Beyond the legal consequences, this event revealed aspects of Jared's behavior Angi likely had not fully understood before their marriage. The situation worsened during Jared's booking process, where his aggressive behavior escalated. Court records showed Jared threatened both the arresting officers and jail staff. His actions became so disruptive that he punched windows and had to be restrained in a chair for safety. This incident highlighted a troubling pattern of aggression that would later become even more significant. As time passed, friends and family noticed more worrying signs in Angi and Jared's marriage. While Angi had seemed very happy at first, her demeanor changed after the wedding. At social gatherings, friends saw a difference in her, though she never openly complained or sought help. One notable incident occurred at a Christmas party in December 2022, just weeks before Angi's death. Friends said that she and Jared left the party abruptly, and Jared looked very upset. Although this worried everyone, no one realized the true severity of the problem. During this period, law enforcement had been called to their home multiple times for domestic disturbances. While Waller County Sheriff Troy Guidry noted that these calls didn't involve extreme violence, they reflected ongoing conflict within the marriage. An unnamed friend of Angi later revealed that Jared had displayed possessive behavior during their marriage. He was described as jealous, and one particular social media post stood out where Jared had written that she was his. The friend found it unsettling, commenting that no one had questioned their relationship, making the post seem unnecessary. Such possessiveness is often a warning sign of potential domestic violence. Despite the warning signs, Angi seemed determined to stay in her marriage. Her friends later speculated that she might have been too embarrassed to admit her relationship was struggling. This hesitation to seek help or openly talk about relationship issues is sadly common among domestic violence victims, who often feel ashamed or believe they can manage the situation on their own. What made Angi's story especially tragic was her unwavering devotion to her family in Nicaragua. Despite facing difficulties in her marriage, she worked 2 jobs to help fund her mother's cancer treatment, showcasing her selflessness and dedication. Her co-workers at Cheppy's Meat Market and Tacaria described her as someone who always put others first and aimed to improve not just her own life, but her entire family's well-being. By January 2023, tensions in Angi and Jared's marriage were clearly escalating. While the specifics of their private arguments remain unknown, it was evident that underlying issues were coming to a dangerous head. Angi, who had immigrated to the U.S. with hope and determination, found herself trapped in a marriage that had become increasingly volatile and unsafe. On the morning of January 11th, 2023, surveillance footage captured Jared at Angi's workplace around 11:40 a.m. The video showed him entering the store, grabbing a beer, and leaving without paying. Even more alarming, he was seen drinking the beer in his car before driving away. This illegal act and erratic behavior suggested Jared was in a highly unstable mental state, possibly reflecting or preparing for what was to come. The footage provided critical insight, revealing a man acting irrationally just hours before an unthinkable crime. Jared's casual theft, his reckless drinking behind the wheel, and his escalating instability painted a picture of someone whose judgment was severely impaired. These actions foreshadowed a tragedy that would devastate 2 families and shock the Waller County community. Later that day, at approximately 4:35 p.m., Jared's parents made a 911 call that would change lives forever. They reported a possible death at their property, specifically inside the small cabin where Jared and Angi lived. Sheriff Troy Guidry later said Jared's father contacted authorities shortly after Jared entered the main house and made a disturbing comment, causing them to worry about Angi's safety. When Waller County deputies arrived, they encountered what Sheriff Troy described as a horrific scene. Inside the cabin, they found Angi's lifeless body near the bed, amidst evidence of extreme violence. She had suffered multiple stab wounds to her back, and the brutality of the attack was shocking. Blood was splattered throughout the cabin, and investigators discovered her body on the floor near the bed in a pool of blood. Disturbingly, her severed head was found in the shower. The severity of the violence left even seasoned law enforcement officers horrified. Crime scene investigators determined that a kitchen knife was used in the attack. Sheriff Troy confirmed that everything occurred on the property, and all evidence was recovered and submitted. The events of that day marked one of the most horrendous crimes in Waller County's history, leaving an indelible mark on the community and on everyone who knew Angi. The brutal and calculated nature of the violence, along with the disposal of Angi's body, shocked investigators. When deputies arrived at the crime scene, they found Jared still present on the property. Rather than fleeing or hiding his actions, he stayed at the location where he had committed the horrific crime. Jared and his parents were taken in for questioning, but it quickly became evident that Jared was solely responsible for the violent act. During his initial interview, Jared gave what Sheriff Troy described as a complete and straightforward confession, admitting to murdering his wife, Angi. While he described what he had done, he offered no explanation or motive for the senseless brutality. Jared confessed to killing Angi in their shared home. However, the lack of a clear motive left investigators and the community stunned. It was incomprehensible that a 21-year-old man could commit such a heinous act against his wife, whom he had married just 3 months earlier. The randomness and cruelty of the crime contradicted everything people believed about Jared and his relationship with Angi. The investigation revealed further disturbing details about the incident of January 11, 2023. Evidence indicated that Angi had fought desperately for her life. Multiple stab wounds to her back suggested that she had tried to flee or defend herself during the attack. Adding to the heartbreak was the discovery that Angi had reportedly been living in fear in the weeks leading up to her death. Prior calls to law enforcement hinted at rising tensions within the home, though no one had anticipated such a horrifying conclusion. For Angi's family in Nicaragua, the loss was beyond devastating. She had left her home country to create a better life and support her family's medical expenses, but her dreams ended in an unimaginable tragedy. Her mother, already battling cancer, now faced the overwhelming grief of losing her eldest daughter. The crime scene investigation lasted several days as law enforcement meticulously gathered evidence to piece together what had happened in the cabin that afternoon. Although the physical evidence detailed the brutal tragedy, the deeper psychological and emotional factors behind Jared's actions remained unclear. When Jared was charged with murder and booked into the Waller County Jail, the community began to confront the reality of how domestic violence could escalate to such a serious level. Although there had been prior warnings, including domestic disturbance reports and concerning behavior from Jared, no one foresaw the violence that ultimately unfolded. The investigation also shed light on Angi's life and the dreams that were tragically cut short. Friends and colleagues shared memories of her ambition, dedication to her family, and pride in her work as a fitness coach. Her untimely death felt even more tragic, as it robbed her of a bright future and a positive impact she had been making on those around her. As the trial progresses, many questions remain about Jared's motive for committing this horrific crime. Although further details about Jared's mental state and behavior emerged during the investigation, the fundamental question of why this tragedy occurred remained only partially answered. With Jared in custody and having confessed to the crime, attention turned to the legal process that would decide his fate. However, no outcome could restore the life lost or ease the grief of Angi's loved ones, who had envisioned a brighter future for her in America. The case immediately raised important questions about domestic violence, mental health, and the systems meant to protect vulnerable individuals. Just months before the crime, Jared had been arrested for DWI and exhibited violent behavior during that incident, yet no system intervened to prevent him from continuing to pose a threat to Angi. Following his arrest and confession, investigators closely examined Jared's background and mental health to understand what led to the tragedy. During the pre-trial phase, Jared's mental health and competency to stand trial became significant concerns. The Waller County Criminal District Attorney's Office acknowledged questions about his mental state. This prompted a court-ordered psychiatric evaluation to determine if Jared could comprehend the charges and participate in his defense. After a thorough assessment, the psychiatrist concluded that, despite any mental health issues, Jared was competent to stand trial. This determination allowed the legal process to proceed. holding Jared fully accountable for his actions. Initially, he was held on a $500,000 bond, but Waller County Criminal District Attorney Sean G. Whitmore argued that this amount was inadequate given the severity of the crime. Citing the brutal nature of Angi's murder and Jared's history of violent behavior, Sean petitioned for the bond to be increased to $1 million. The district attorney's request was supported by Jared's past actions, including his threats against police officers and jail staff during his arrest 2 months prior. These incidents highlighted Jared's violent tendencies, especially under stress or the influence of substances, and emphasized the public safety risk he posed. After hearing both sides, the judge approved raising the bond to $1 million and ordered an additional mental health evaluation to further assess Jared's psychological state before trial. As legal proceedings moved forward, District Attorney Whitmore worked closely with Angi's family to understand their feelings and priorities. While grieving and organizing the repatriation of Angi's remains to Nicaragua, the family expressed a desire for justice without enduring a prolonged and painful trial. Prosecutors and defense attorneys began discussions on a plea agreement that could resolve the case without a trial. This agreement aimed to secure a significant prison sentence for Jared while sparing Angi's family the trauma of revisiting the tragic details in court. The negotiations were challenging, requiring a balance between the severity of the crime, the legal process, and the family's wishes. Prosecutors sought a resolution that acknowledged the heinous nature of the crime while offering closure to those grieving Angi. Meanwhile, the community grappled with the broader implications of the tragedy. Domestic violence advocates used the case to raise awareness about recognizing warning signs and supporting individuals in potentially dangerous relationships. The multiple visits by law enforcement to Jared and Angi's home before the murders were a clear warning that domestic violence can escalate over time and often leads to serious consequences. On July 31, 2024, more than a year after Angi's death, Jared James Deacus appeared in court before Judge Gary Cheney to finalize a plea agreement that resolved the case. Jared pleaded guilty to murdering his wife, resulting in a 40-year prison sentence in the Texas Department of Criminal Justice Institutional Division. As part of this agreement, Jared gave up his right to appeal the verdict, waived potential defenses, including insanity, and forfeited his ability to file future habeas corpus petitions. This significantly reduces his chances of appealing his sentence. Jared will not be eligible for parole until at least 2043, meaning he is set to spend decades behind bars. As District Attorney of Whitmore County explained, being eligible does not mean being guaranteed a pardon. If denied, Jared could spend even more time in prison. Angi's family was heavily consulted throughout the process to ensure their wishes were respected. They agreed to the plea deal, believing it honored Angi's memory and allowed them the closure needed to begin healing. At the sentencing, the emotional toll on Angi's family and community was evident. District Attorney Whitmore reiterated Waller County's commitment to combating domestic violence, stating that Waller County does not tolerate domestic violence and that crimes like this would not go unanswered. He emphasized that they would fight for victims and hold perpetrators accountable. He also praised the Waller County Sheriff's Office for their thorough investigation and commitment to justice. For Angi's family, the sentencing marked the end of a painful legal process, but also the beginning of the long road to healing. While nothing could bring Angi back, knowing Jared was held accountable brought a measure of justice. At the same time, they faced the challenge of rebuilding their lives while carrying the weight of their loss. This case highlighted the devastating impact of domestic violence and the importance of recognizing warning signs, such as the concerning behavior Jared exhibited before the murder, missed opportunities to intervene, such as prior police calls to their home, Jared's violent actions during a DWI arrest, and reports of possessive behavior underscored the need for greater awareness and proactive measures. In the aftermath, community groups and domestic violence advocates used Angi's story to educate others about the warning signs of abusive relationships and resources available to those at risk. Her tragic death became a catalyst for discussions about protecting vulnerable individuals and preventing similar tragedies. The case also shed light on the complex relationship between mental health and criminal accountability. While Jared's mental health was acknowledged during the trial, the court deemed him competent and held him fully responsible for his actions. This affirmed the principle that mental health challenges cannot excuse or justify acts of violence, even when they provide context for the behavior. When Jared began his sentence, Angi's family focused on honoring her memory and supporting others facing similar struggles. They collaborated with community organizations to raise awareness about domestic violence and ensured Angi's story served as both a warning and inspiration for change. While the legal system brought justice in this case, the ultimate goal should be prevention, protecting young women like Angi before they fall victim to such violence. Those who knew Angi remember her as a hopeful, ambitious young woman who loved her family deeply. Her tragic death, at just 21, represents not only a personal loss to her loved ones, but also a collective loss to the community. Angi's dreams, dedication to supporting her family, and success as a fitness coach highlight the bright future taken from her. Ultimately, she will not be remembered solely as a victim of domestic violence, but as a determined, hard-working young woman who came to America seeking a better life for herself and her family. District Attorney Whitmore emphasized that they would seek justice for victims of domestic violence and send a message to perpetrators that in their jurisdiction, they fight for their victims. Angi's case, he noted, underscores both the critical need for this fight and the devastating consequences of unchecked violence. He stated that her memory would continue to inspire efforts to prevent such tragedies and assist those in need of safety and support to escape dangerous situations. It was March the 25th, 2022 in Mayfield, a quiet suburb of Newcastle, Australia. 21-year-old McKenzie Anderson, known as Max to her friends, was at home in her modest apartment on Crebot Street. She was a young mother, her life revolving around her 23-month-old son. Around 10:40 p.m., a frantic call reached the local police. A neighbor, startled by screams, reported a disturbance at McKenzie's apartment. The police rushed to the scene. When they arrived at the Mayfield Street apartment, they found a horrific scene. McKenzie was born and raised in Newcastle, New South Wales, in a close-knit family. Her mother, Tabitha Ackret, a dental hygienist, was a pillar of support. Their bond was evident in the heartfelt tributes Tabitha later shared. McKenzie was also close to her stepfather and friends, who described her as the heart of their circle. She had a knack for making people laugh, often sharing snippets of her life on social media, where her TikTok videos captured her humor and strength as a young mother. Her son was her world, and she poured her energy into creating a stable life for him despite the hardships she faced. McKenzie's life hadn't been easy. By her early 20s, she was navigating the challenges of single motherhood while living in a modest unit on Crebot Street. Friends said she was determined to break free from a cycle of hardship, working to provide for her son and dreaming of a brighter future. Her relationship with Tyrone Thompson, her ex-partner, cast a long shadow over her life. The two began dating in late 2019, and their on-again relationship was marked by turbulence. By October 2021, Thompson had been jailed for assaulting McKenzie, intimidating her, and damaging her property. An apprehended violence order was in place, meant to keep Thompson away from McKenzie, prohibiting any contact or visits to her home. He served a short sentence with a non-parole period of just over 4 months and was released on March 9, 2022. McKenzie's friends later revealed McKenzie lived in constant fear, convinced Thompson would come after her once he was free. Then, she messaged a friend, saying that Tyrone had just gotten out of jail and was still being weird, harassing her. Despite the AVO, Thompson reached out to McKenzie almost immediately after his release, calling her and sending messages from multiple social media accounts. One heartbreaking detail emerged later. McKenzie had ordered for a new set of knives for Christmas 2021, a practical gift for her home. Those same knives would later become part of the tragedy. The night of March 25th, 2022, started like any other in the quiet suburb of Mayfield, but beneath the surface of this ordinary night, a tragedy was unfolding. McKenzie's apartment on Mayfield was a small, unassuming unit in a block of flats, the kind of place where neighbors knew each other by sight, even by name. That evening, she wasn't alone. A male friend, whose identity was closely guarded in early reports, was with her, along with her 23-month-old son, who was likely asleep in his crib. Tyrone Thompson, her ex-partner, was also present at some point during the night, despite the apprehended violence order that barred him from contacting her or visiting her home. The details of how Thompson ended up at her apartment remain murky, but court records later revealed that he had been asked to leave multiple times that evening. His refusal to comply set the stage for what would become a devastating confrontation. In panic, a neighbor dialed emergency services, describing a scene that sounded dire: a woman's voice in distress, a man's voice shouting, and the unmistakable sense that something was terribly wrong. The urgency was clear enough to prompt an immediate response from the Newcastle City Police District. When police arrived at the apartment block, they were met with a harrowing sight. McKenzie lay lifeless on the veranda outside her unit, her body surrounded by blood. The scene was chaotic, with paramedics soon joining the officers in a frantic attempt to save her. Despite their best efforts, McKenzie was pronounced dead at the scene. Her injuries were too severe to overcome. Her toddler son, found inside the apartment, was mercifully unharmed. Police found a man at the scene, later identified as Tyrone Thompson, sitting cross-legged at the top of the communal stairs, his hand bloodied and injured. He was loud and demanding medical attention for his wound. A broken knife handle and blade were found near McKenzie, stark evidence of the brutality that had unfolded. Thompson was arrested and taken to hospital under police guard for treatment of his injury. The tragedy was the culmination of events that had been building for weeks. After his release from prison on March 9, 2022, Thompson immediately breached the apprehended violence order. He began contacting McKenzie, calling her, messaging her from multiple social media accounts, and even reaching out to people close to her new partner. Court documents later revealed that McKenzie had spent much of the previous 6 days with Thompson. Despite her fear of him, friends said she felt trapped, unsure how to break free from his persistent attempts to reconnect. That night, Thompson and a male friend were among those gathered at her apartment. Though the exact dynamics remain unclear, tensions escalated. The male friend, who had left earlier in the evening, returned to check on her, only to witness a horrific scene. Thompson standing over McKenzie, who was already on the ground. Investigators later learned that McKenzie had been trying to protect herself in the days leading up to that night. She had reached out to domestic violence advocacy groups, emailing them to request help with security measures like cameras and reinforced doors. The night of March 25th wasn't a sudden explosion of violence, but the culmination of a pattern of control and intimidation. Yet, the system allowed him back into her life just 16 days before her death. The AVO, meant to be her shield, was little more than a piece of paper. The Newcastle City Police District launched a meticulous investigation to uncover what had happened in those chaotic final moments. The investigation began at the crime scene itself. Detectives meticulously combed through McKenzie's apartment, cataloging every detail. The veranda where her body was found was a focal point, marked by bloodstains and the shattered remnants of a knife. Forensic teams collected the fragments, knowing they could hold critical clues about the weapon and its wielder. Inside the apartment, officers found signs of a disturbance: overturned furniture, scattered belongings, and traces of blood that hinted at a confrontation that had moved from inside to the veranda. Digital evidence also became a cornerstone of the investigation. McKenzie's phone and social media accounts revealed a trail of fear and desperation. Investigators found messages between McKenzie and Thompson showing they had been in contact since his release. Some exchanges were tense, others oddly amicable, suggesting a complex dynamic. Thompson had also messaged people close to McKenzie's new partner, attempting to gather information or assert control. These communications, pulled from servers and cross-referenced with phone records, showed he had breached the AVO multiple times. Detectives also explored McKenzie's broader relationships. They interviewed her mother, Tabitha, who shared her daughter's fears about Thompson. In a statement to the court, later reported by the Newcastle Herald, Tabitha said, "McKenzie lived in constant fear after Thompson's release." McKenzie told Tabitha he wouldn't let her go. Friends echoed this, describing how McKenzie had confided in them about Thompson's persistent attempts to reconnect. One friend told police she wanted to protect her son but felt trapped, like there was no way out. During police questioning, Thompson's statements were guarded but revealing. According to court reports, later cited by the Newcastle Herald, he claimed the incident was a chaotic misunderstanding. He admitted to being at McKenzie's apartment that night, despite the AVO, but insisted he had been invited. He described an argument that escalated, alleging that McKenzie had been the aggressor, wielding a knife in a heated moment. His account painted a picture of self-defense, claiming his hand injury came from trying to disarm her, though his story shifted under scrutiny with inconsistencies about the sequence of events. He denied any intent to harm her. However, his explanation struggled to align with the physical evidence. The broken knife, McKenzie's fatal injuries, and witness accounts of her desperation to escape. Detectives pressed Thompson about his actions in the days leading up to the incident, confronting him with evidence of his repeated AVO breaches, including messages and calls to McKenzie and her associate. Thompson downplayed these breaches, claiming he was trying to sort things out and maintain a connection for the sake of their shared history. As Thompson remained in custody, the investigation continued to solidify the case. Forensic reports confirmed McKenzie's blood on the knife and Thompson's DNA on the handle, strengthening the link to the crime. The autopsy of McKenzie Anderson revealed she suffered 78 stab wounds inflicted in less than 3 minutes. On March 27, 2022, Thompson was formally charged with murder, breaching an AVO, and related offenses stemming from the events of that night. The murder charge was anchored by compelling evidence, knife fragments bearing McKenzie's blood, witness accounts of her screams, and Thompson's presence at the scene with a suspicious injury. Additional charges included intimidating behavior, reflecting his pattern of harassment in the weeks prior. The motive, while not explicitly stated by Thompson, emerged through the investigation's findings. Detectives and domestic violence experts consulted concluded Thompson's actions stemmed from a need to regain control of McKenzie, who was trying to move on with her life and protect her son. The presence of McKenzie's male friend that night may have been a catalyst, intensifying Thompson's fixation. The charges against Thompson were a step toward justice. They also highlighted the failures that allowed him to remain a threat. By early 2025, the case had reached a critical juncture in the Newcastle Supreme Court, where the pursuit of justice for the 21-year-old mother unfolded. Initially set for a 4-week trial starting April 7, 2025, the case took a dramatic turn when Tyrone Thompson, then 25, changed his plea on April 1, 2025, in the New South Wales Supreme Court. He pleaded guilty to the domestic violence murder of McKenzie Anderson, halting the need for a full trial. This plea came after years of denials, during which he had maintained his innocence even as evidence mounted against him. The guilty plea was a significant moment, sparing McKenzie's family the pain of a protracted trial, but shifting the focus to the sentencing hearing, where the court would determine the consequences of his actions. The hearing, presided over by Justice Richard Weinstein, became a pivotal moment for all involved. The prosecution, led by Crown Prosecutor Brendan Queenan, presented a harrowing case, They argued that Thompson's actions on March 25, 2022, were a brutal culmination of a pattern of control and violence. Court documents detailed how Thompson, on parole for prior domestic violence offenses against McKenzie, ignored an apprehended violence order and broke into her Mayfield apartment twice that night. Using 2 kitchen knives, he stabbed her 78 times in less than 3 minutes, an attack so ferocious that one knife snapped. The prosecution emphasized McKenzie's vulnerability, noting her repeated attempts to seek safety through advocacy groups and her fear that Thompson would harm her after his release. The defense, representing Thompson, acknowledged the gravity of his actions, but sought leniency by highlighting mitigating factors. They argued that Thompson's mental health issues and challenging background diminished his moral culpability. His legal team submitted that he was not psychotic at the time of the crime, but struggled with emotional instability, which contributed to the escalation. Then, an apology letter from Thompson was tendered, in which he expressed regret, stating, "No words can undo the pain and devastation he caused to someone he genuinely loved." However, the prosecution challenged this, with Queenan noting there is some element of victim blaming. Justice Weinstein, wary of the letter's sincerity, remarked that it offered limited insight into true remorse. On May 1, 2025, Justice Weinstein delivered the sentence. Thompson was jailed for a maximum of 22 years 6 months, with a non-parole period of 15 years 6 months, making him eligible for parole in 2038. The judge described the attack as a frenzied act of such ferocity that it left McKenzie's family shattered. Noting their helplessness, despair, and anger, he acknowledged the aggravating factors, including Thompson's prior violence and McKenzie's fear, but also considered his guilty plea and personal circumstances when setting the term. The sentence sparked immediate outrage from McKenzie's family, particularly her mother, Tabitha Ackert. Outside the Newcastle Supreme Court, she collapsed in tears, telling reporters that whilst it might be thought of as a good outcome for the courts, they were disgusted that that sentence was what they thought the value of her daughter's life was worth. She called the sentence an insult to women globally and demanded an appeal. On May 14, 2025, the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions announced it would appeal Thompson's sentence, arguing that it was manifestly inadequate given the severity of the crime. Tabitha welcomed the decision, stating, "This is the first hurdle to getting a sentence that is more in line with community and moral standards." The appeal, set for a 2-hour hearing in the Court of Criminal Appeal on August 8, 2025, aims to increase Thompson's jail time. Prosecutors are citing the need to set a stronger precedent against domestic violence offenders. The case's current status leaves Thompson in prison, awaiting the appeal's outcome. While McKenzie's family continues their advocacy, the appeal could reshape the sentence, but no verdict can undo the loss. For McKenzie's son, now in the care of relatives and her loved ones, the fight is as much about honoring her memory as it is about ensuring others don't suffer the same fate. The question lingers: will the legal system deliver a punishment that reflects the true cost of McKenzie's life, or will it fall short again? Anthony Pignitaro was born in 1960 in Buffalo, New York, the youngest of 2 brothers. His father, Ralph Pignitaro, was a well-known and highly respected surgeon in the community. After finishing high school, he decided to follow in his father's footsteps and applied to several medical schools in the U.S. However, due to his low grades, he was not admitted to any of them. Eventually, he gained acceptance to a medical school in Puerto Rico, where he began his journey toward becoming a doctor. In 1978, 18 years old, Anthony met 21-year-old Deborah at a club during a visit to his hometown. It was love at first sight. Anthony, tall and charming, swept Deborah off her feet as they danced to Donna Summer's Last Dance. Soon after meeting, they began a relationship. Despite their long-distance relationship, while Anthony studied in Puerto Rico and Deborah worked in New York, their love affair continued. Deborah was born and raised in Williamsville, New York, in a financially struggling family. She worked as a pharmacy assistant, In 1985, after graduating as an ENT doctor from medical school in Puerto Rico, Anthony returned to New York, obtained a medical license, and started working as a surgeon at a local hospital. However, his colleagues criticized his skills, calling him incompetent and predicting an unremarkable career. Despite this, he managed to keep his job. That same year, Anthony and Deborah got married. Early in their marriage, Deborah discovered through a friend that Anthony was having an affair. When she confided in her father, he advised her to forgive Anthony, but only once. Deborah decided to give him another chance. Not long after, they welcomed a son, and a year later, a daughter. They moved into a large home in suburban Buffalo, where Anthony started his own surgical practice. He rented office space in a private clinic and began seeing patients. By 1990, 30 years old, Anthony gained attention for inventing a wig prosthesis that was attached to the scalp using metal pins implanted in the skull. He became his own first client, as he had begun losing his hair at the age of 23. This wig became his patented invention. With prices starting at $3,500, clients could choose from a variety of natural and synthetic hair options. This invention contributed to his local fame. Anthony also performed cosmetic surgeries, such as breast augmentations, facelifts, rhinoplasties, liposuctions, and more. His services were competitively priced, and he often ran promotions to attract clients. Over the next 7 years, Anthony became wealthy and locally renowned, even driving a red Lamborghini. However, his reputation concealed the troubling events that were occurring in his operating room. In 1997, Terry Lamarty, a mother of 4, struggled to lose excess belly fat despite regular exercise. On her 39th birthday, her husband gave her a voucher for a belly liposuction treatment at Anthony's clinic. Excited, she scheduled a consultation with Anthony. During their meeting, she was impressed by his charisma and reassurances, which put her at ease. Anthony assured her that the procedure would go smoothly. Terry began preparing for the operation, undergoing necessary medical tests, consulting specialists, and completing the required paperwork. The surgery was scheduled for June 1997. On the day of her scheduled procedure at 8:30 a.m., Terry's husband drove her to the clinic. Upon arrival, she went to see Anthony to be examined and given medication to prepare for the surgery. He then wheeled her into the clinic's basement, referred to as the surgical center. To Terry's shock, the room looked nothing like a sterile operating theater. It was just an ordinary basement furnished with a couch, a table, and chairs. She didn't see any proper surgical equipment. Feeling uneasy, she tried to express her desire to cancel the operation, but she was already under the effects of the medication. Her speech slurred, and she lost control of her body. Before passing out, she helplessly screamed. Terry regained consciousness at 5 p.m., fully clothed and sitting on a small sofa in the clinic's first-floor waiting room. Her husband arrived shortly after and took her home. Once home, Terry noticed blood running down her legs. Panicked, she examined herself and found a roughly 10 centimeter long and 2 centimeter deep surgical incision on her stomach, poorly closed with about 20 metal staples. Alarmed, she and her husband immediately called Anthony over the phone. He dismissed their concerns, claiming the blood was excess surgical fluid and telling them not to worry. He assured them the wound was minor and advised Terry to rest and visit him the next morning. That night, Terry's pain became unbearable, worsening by the hour. She also experienced severe nausea and vomiting. By morning, she couldn't endure it anymore and called for an ambulance. At the hospital, doctors discovered that Anthony's stitches were blocking blood flow to her abdomen, causing some tissue to necrotize. On top of that, her intestines had been damaged during the procedure, leading to an infection in the wound. Instead of achieving her desired appearance, Terry was now fighting for her life. Fortunately, she received help in time and survived. A few days later, at 2:30 just while Terry was still recovering in the hospital, she was startled awake by Anthony. He had secretly entered her room and was holding her medical records. He demanded that she immediately pack her belongings and leave the hospital. Terrified, Terry refused and argued with him. Hospital nurses overheard the confrontation, and Anthony was forced to leave. After this alarming encounter, Terry remained in the hospital for several more days. Her recovery stretched on for months, and despite doctors reporting the incident to the State Department of Health, Anthony continued practicing medicine. 2 months later, in August 1997, a more tragic event occurred at Anthony's clinic. 26-year-old Sarah Smith, a mother of 2, underwent breast implant surgery, a procedure she had long dreamed of. During the operation, Sarah suffered cardiac arrest. Anthony called an ambulance, but when paramedics arrived, they found him trying to clear Sarah's airway using a wire hanger. The clinic lacked even basic life-saving medical equipment, like a ventilation device. Paramedics resuscitated Sarah on site and transported her to the hospital, but she had already fallen into a coma. After a week in intensive care, Sarah passed away on September 1, 1997. News of Sarah's death quickly spread, sparking a media frenzy. Anthony admitted that Sarah had stopped breathing during the surgery. He said he performed cardiopulmonary resuscitation and injected her with lidocaine, but it was ineffective. Ultimately, he instructed his assistants to call for an ambulance. An investigation by the Herald Police Department revealed that Sarah's death was caused by asphyxia due to severely low oxygen levels, which led to cardiac arrest. A toxicology report further showed that Anthony had administered a dangerously high dose of 2 muscle-relaxing drugs during the procedure, leaving Sarah unable to breathe on her own. After Sarah's death, the New York State Department of Health suspended Anthony Pignitaro's medical license. Shortly thereafter, the Erie County District Attorney's Office in New York launched an investigation. Anthony, who had an inflated self-image, had opened his own plastic surgery clinic but failed to hire an anesthesiologist or adequately trained staff. Instead, his wife, Deborah, assisted him despite having only 6 months of medical training. Additionally, a young female medical student interned at the clinic. During Sarah's procedure, both Deborah and the intern reported that Sarah woke up mid-surgery, screaming. In response, Anthony administered additional drugs, causing Sarah to lose consciousness once again. Deborah noticed that Sarah's oxygen levels had dropped to a dangerously low level and alerted Anthony, but he ignored her and continued the operation. Shortly after, Sarah's lips turned blue. She stopped breathing, and her heart eventually stopped. Investigators interviewed Anthony's colleagues and patients, uncovering a reputation for gross incompetence and recklessness. Many of his patients had suffered complications following surgeries. For instance, 78 years old, Sophie Butring underwent a tummy tuck performed by Anthony. She became ill after the procedure, but was hesitant to seek medical attention. Her son eventually convinced her to go to the hospital, which saved her life. She spent 6 weeks in the hospital, recovering from complications caused by the surgery. The New York State Board of Health eventually filed 30 charges of professional misconduct against Anthony. Investigators discovered that he was not licensed to perform plastic surgery and that his basement clinic was grossly unfit for medical procedures. In January 1998, Anthony, then 38 years old, was arrested. By August of that year, his medical license was permanently revoked. Anthony ultimately accepted a plea deal on a negligent homicide charge and was sentenced to 6 months in prison, fined $5,000, and ordered to complete 250 hours of community service. He was also permanently banned from practicing medicine. As the verdict was announced, the judge ordered Anthony to be taken into custody immediately. Deborah, who was visibly upset in the courtroom, was not allowed to say goodbye to her husband. However, if Deborah had known what lay ahead, she likely would not have shed any tears. In December 1998, Anthony was released from jail. He returned home to live with his wife and children, but struggled to find work. During this time, his mother provided financial support. Despite the challenges, he resumed an extramarital affair, which his wife, Deborah, eventually discovered. Furious, she kicked him out of the house. 2 months later, he returned, begging for a second chance. and she reluctantly took him back. By May 1999, Deborah, then 42 years old, suddenly fell gravely ill. She suffered episodes of nausea and body pain, which gradually worsened to include tingling in her arms and legs, difficulty walking, and extended periods confined to bed. Although Deborah sought medical help, doctors were initially unable to determine the cause of her symptoms. Over the following months, her condition continued to deteriorate. By the summer of 1999, she required a wheelchair and began experiencing memory loss. Anthony claimed her symptoms were caused by a diseased gallbladder, which he insisted needed urgent removal. However, Deborah's physician warned that surgery would be too dangerous and could result in her death. Eventually, toxicology tests revealed lethal levels of arsenic in Deborah's blood. A criminal investigation into Deborah's poisoning was launched. Tests conducted on her hair showed that she had been exposed to approximately 30 grams of arsenic in varying doses since May. During questioning, Deborah recalled that her symptoms began after eating soup Anthony had prepared for her. Investigators suspected Anthony had been poisoning her over time. Deborah granted police permission to search their home, where they discovered ant killer containing arsenic. Further evidence revealed that Anthony had purchased the poison using his credit card. He was subsequently brought in for questioning. Anthony admitted to poisoning Deborah, but suggested that the relatives of his deceased patient, Sarah, who passed away after surgery, might have been involved. Due to insufficient evidence, Anthony was released. Deborah was discharged from the hospital, though she remained in a wheelchair and needed ongoing treatment at home. Later, a former cellmate of Anthony's, who had shared a prison cell with him, contacted the police. The cellmate revealed that Anthony had discussed his wife, Deborah's life insurance policy, and his relationship with his mistress. According to the cellmate, Anthony confessed he wanted to start a new life with his mistress and obtain the insurance payout. He had even asked the cellmate for advice on poisoning someone. Recorded phone conversations confirmed that Anthony maintained contact with the cellmate after his release from prison. With this evidence, Anthony was arrested on May 9, 2000 for attempted murder. While he initially denied poisoning Deborah, he eventually pleaded guilty at the end of 2000. Prosecutors proved that Anthony had been adding small doses of poison to Deborah's food and planning to send her for gallbladder surgery, hoping she would die during the procedure. His motive was to prove he wasn't the only doctor to lose a patient on the operating table, reclaim his reputation, and regain financial success. He also sought to justify Sarah's death. Anthony Pignitaro was sentenced to 12 years in prison. While incarcerated, he continued to file lawsuits, claiming that Deborah intentionally consumed arsenic to end her life. However, Deborah refuted this in interviews, stating she would never harm herself and even suggested Anthony should experience arsenic poisoning. Following the trial, she divorced Anthony and obtained a protective order prohibiting him from contacting her or their children. Deborah endured a lengthy recovery process after the poisoning. She revealed in interviews that she suffered lasting health issues, including reduced limb mobility and sensitivity, and required outside assistance for daily life. In December 2013, Anthony was released from prison and moved back to New York, where he worked as a grocery delivery man. He legally changed his name to Tony Hote in 2014, explaining that he wanted a fresh start. By 2016, he launched a cosmetic company and falsely portrayed himself as a practicing doctor on the business website. He marketed a product called the Plasma Protocol, claiming it was the first anti-aging skincare treatment derived from a person's DNA plasma. The company operated near his previous plastic surgery clinic. Neighbors began reporting suspicious activities at Anthony's residence, including deliveries of surgical supplies and frequent visits from women in the evenings. These reports prompted police attention, leading Anthony to shut down his business and move to Palm Beach, Florida, where his brother lived. New York police warned law enforcement in Palm Beach about Anthony, describing him as one of the most dangerous people they had ever encountered. By 2019, Anthony was advertising elder care services online and continued to move freely across the country. Florida authorities monitored him, but there remained concerns about whether he posed a risk to others. As for Deborah, she maintained a private life and struggled with the lasting impact of Anthony's actions, unable to fully recover her health or independence. The car had gone off the road and landed in a ditch. At first, it was quiet, but then smoke began to rise. Inside, a woman wasn't moving. Her husband stood outside, simply watching. He didn't call for help. Malcolm John Webster was born on April 18, 1959, in Wandsworth, Greater London. On the surface, his background appeared stable, even enviable. His father, Alexander Robertson Webster, held a high-ranking position within the Metropolitan Police, serving as a detective chief superintendent in the fraud squad. His mother, Odette Blewett, had once worked as a nurse, but gave up her profession to raise their children behind closed doors. However, the family home was governed by unrelenting discipline and an unsettling set of rules. Alexander ran the household with absolute control. When he used the bathroom, everyone else had to vacate the house. Meals were taken in silence unless he initiated a conversation. Emotional warmth was rare, and affection was nearly absent. Major family decisions, including financial matters, were handled solely by Alexander. From an early age, Malcolm displayed troubling signs. While his twin sister, Caroline, easily made friends, Malcolm struggled to connect, but rather than withdraw quietly, he developed unusual ways of attracting attention. He began pretending to faint, often collapsing at convenient moments to avoid chores or responsibilities. His apparent health issues led to speculative diagnoses, ranging from asthma to epilepsy. Yet, no solid medical explanation was ever confirmed. Doctors prescribed medications based on symptoms, never seeking a definitive cause. As sympathy began to fade, Malcolm escalated his attention-seeking behavior. He became fascinated with fire, setting small blazes in school and earning the nickname Pyro from classmates. Though these incidents never resulted in formal charges, they left other parents uneasy. Children were warned to stay away from him, and isolation became his norm. At home, comparisons with his more sociable sister only deepened his resentment. His parents, hoping to give him a fresh start, enrolled him in a private boys' school. Initially, Malcolm appeared to flourish. He joined the drama club, improved his grades, and reinvented himself. He claimed his family was wealthy and well-connected, but his lies eventually caught up with him, and once again, trust in him eroded. At 15, Malcolm was pulled out of school. He didn't resist. Education no longer interested him. He wanted independence and income. In his early career, he struggled to find work he enjoyed. He drifted from job to job, including garbage collection, fruit picking, and retail. But none of these roles gave him a sense of purpose or satisfaction. At 17, guided by his mother, Malcolm began training as a nurse. Surprisingly, he thrived and began a serious relationship, which ended suddenly due to a terminated pregnancy and the resulting emotional distress. However, Malcolm persevered. When he was 30, Malcolm worked in Tawam Hospital, on the children's ward in Abu Dhabi, UAE. It was here that his criminal tendencies surfaced. Trusted by elderly residents, he volunteered to manage their finances, only to siphon off their savings for personal luxuries, including rounds of drinks and expensive golf equipment. When that scam lost steam, he shifted tactics. He started targeting older, wealthier women. His charm was disarming, and his lies were convincing. Posing as a struggling young man with tales of hardship, he extracted money and gifts with calculated precision. In the late 1980s, within months, 3 children with special needs died under his care. Each suffered sudden cardiac arrests. There were no signs of illness beforehand, no medical warning signs. Though no autopsies were conducted, whispers began circulating among the staff. But in a region where autopsies were culturally discouraged, no investigations followed. Malcolm simply left the country without consequences. Back in the UK, he resumed his life as though nothing had happened. He found work as a nurse and began cultivating his social image once more. At a party, he met a woman named Claire Morris. She was born on December 26, 1961, just 2 years after Malcolm. She grew up in a secure, affluent household and had a younger brother named Peter Morris. Claire was the kind of person who lit up a room, outgoing, confident, and full of energy. She was popular because of her lively personality. One evening, she met Malcolm at a party, and he was immediately drawn to her charm. Claire represented everything he admired: warmth, vitality, and a strong sense of self. The two struck up a conversation and quickly began spending time together. On the surface, their relationship progressed naturally, but beneath the surface, doubts quietly stirred. Claire's mother, Betty Morris, had reservations from the beginning. There was something about Malcolm that didn't sit right with her. Though she couldn't quite articulate it, her instincts whispered caution. Peter, on the other hand, initially welcomed Malcolm into the family, finding him clever and polite, perhaps a bit of a rogue, but nothing more. From Malcolm's perspective, Claire was radiant. His twin sister Caroline described Claire as generous and kind-hearted, someone who brought genuine happiness into her brother's life. Even Odette, Malcolm's emotionally distant mother, spoke positively of her. For once, it seemed Malcolm had found a partner who might steer his life in the right direction. They married on September 3rd, 1993. The ceremony was beautiful. Claire looked radiant, and Malcolm performed his role to perfection. The devoted husband, charming and attentive. Friends and family left the celebration believing they had a bright future ahead of them. Young, in love, and financially stable, everything appeared idyllic. But everything changed just 9 months later. On May 27, 1994, tragedy struck. Malcolm and Claire had been driving along a quiet rural road, with Malcolm at the wheel and Claire beside him. According to his account, a motorcyclist suddenly appeared on the wrong side of the road, forcing him to swerve. He claimed to have overcorrected, sending the vehicle into a ditch. Moments later, the car burst into flames. Malcolm escaped. Claire did not. He was taken to hospital and kept under observation for a week. He complained of pain, appeared emotionally broken, and wore a neck brace. But scans and medical tests showed no significant injuries. There were no broken bones, no burns, and no smoke inhalation. His physical condition was inconsistent with the violent wreckage he described. At Claire's funeral, Malcolm appeared inconsolable, barely able to speak. Peter held his hand throughout the ceremony, unaware that the man he was comforting would later spend Claire's life insurance payout, £200,000 British, an enormous sum in 1994 on a £30,000 British yacht, a new Range Rover, and other lavish expenses. The money vanished quickly. Questions began to surface. Why hadn't Claire managed to escape the car, as Malcolm had investigators confirmed that while the car had veered off the road, the crash hadn't been severe. It wasn't traveling at high speed, and the damage didn't suggest a violent impact. The fire's origin remained unknown. Even more troubling was that when Malcolm phoned for help, he told dispatchers the vehicle was empty. Despite his wife being inside, he never mentioned Claire. Despite these troubling details, no formal charges were ever brought. The case was closed, and Malcolm's life continued undisturbed by suspicion. Behind the scenes, he had already moved on. Soon after Claire's death, Malcolm began a secret affair with Geraldine Oakley, a hospital IT manager. Publicly, he was a grieving widower trying to rebuild his life. Privately, Geraldine began noticing unusual behavior. Malcolm talked about Claire's death in unsettlingly clinical terms, often circling back to whether a second autopsy would be ordered. His cold fascination with the topic disturbed her deeply. Geraldine confided her concerns to a consultant pathologist. She feared there was more to Claire's death than anyone realized. Eventually, unable to reconcile her suspicions with their relationship, Geraldine walked away. Unfazed, Malcolm shifted locations once again. By 1995, he was living in Saudi Arabia. There, he connected with a woman named Brenda Grant over the phone. They eventually met in person a few times, but the friendship ended abruptly when, according to Brenda, Malcolm offered her illegal substances, an offer she firmly declined. After his stay in Saudi Arabia, Malcolm relocated once more, this time crossing hemispheres entirely and settling in New Zealand in the mid-1990s. No longer working as a nurse, he presented himself as a computer specialist. At a dinner party that month, he met Felicity Drum, a bright, outgoing cancer nurse. She was intelligent, well-spoken, and 3 years younger than Malcolm. Her personality was magnetic, polished, lively, and full of warmth. For a man like Malcolm, she was the perfect mark. He played the role to perfection, attentive, affectionate, and emotionally present. To Felicity, he seemed sensitive and grounded, often speaking of life's fragility and how important it was not to waste time. Within months, they were inseparable. By January 1997, Malcolm had proposed. They married that April in Auckland, and for their honeymoon, they retreated to the idyllic Bay of Islands. But amid the calm beaches and scenic beauty, a far darker undercurrent began to emerge. Felicity later recounted one disturbing episode from the trip. She drank a cup of tea, prepared by Malcolm, and fell into a deep, unnatural sleep that lasted nearly 36 hours. It wasn't a one-off. In the months that followed, she experienced troubling health issues, double vision, unsteadiness, periods of confusion, and extended bouts of sleep, all suspiciously occurring after eating or drinking something provided by her husband. When she raised her concerns, Malcolm dismissed them as stress-related. Doctors were consulted, but none could pinpoint the cause. Tests showed abnormal liver function, usually associated with substance abuse or medication toxicity, neither of which applied to Felicity, who lived a healthy lifestyle. Still, Malcolm continued preparing all her meals, always at her side, always in control. Their home life soon took on a sinister pattern. Fires began to follow them. One broke out at Felicity's parents' house while the couple was staying there, another at a rental cottage, and a third at a property they were considering purchasing. These accidents left Felicity uneasy, but she brushed them off until Malcolm encouraged her to take out a life insurance policy. She agreed. In 1998, they welcomed a son. From the outside, it looked like a happy family. Malcolm was attentive, affectionate, and often seen doting on his child, but his affection masked a growing deception. In early 1999, Felicity and Malcolm planned to purchase a home in Auckland. Malcolm repeatedly stalled the payment, claiming the funds from a UK bank transfer hadn't cleared. As the February 12th deadline approached, the pressure mounted. That day, Malcolm and Felicity headed to the bank together. During the drive, Malcolm began complaining about the car's steering. Then, without warning, the vehicle veered across 2 lanes and slammed into a ditch. Felicity grabbed the wheel in panic and found it responsive. Nothing about the car's handling felt off. Malcolm got out of the car and asked her to stay put. However, she disobeyed and got out to call the bank, probably to reschedule their meeting. Just a week after the crash, Malcolm arranged a picnic in a remote area. During the drive, the couple argued, nothing major. Then, in an apparent peace offering, Malcolm handed her a bottle of water. Moments later, Felicity passed out. She awoke hours later in the passenger seat, disoriented and groggy. The car was now deep within a forest. Her phone rang. It was her father, worried after not hearing from her. When Malcolm returned to the car and saw her awake, he looked startled, alarmed even. He climbed into the car, tense, and asked how she had managed to regain consciousness. Felicity didn't know. Her head spun. Her memory was foggy, but one thing was clear. Something was terribly wrong. She demanded he take her home immediately. Back at the house, with her senses returning, she started asking questions. Why had they been in the middle of the forest? What had caused her to pass out? Malcolm dodged her inquiries. Then he suddenly clutched his chest and claimed he might be having a heart attack. He rushed off, allegedly heading to the hospital. Hours later, he returned with an astonishing announcement. Doctors had diagnosed him with leukemia, but this was no cry for help. It was a distraction. Felicity's father had already harbored suspicions about his son-in-law. After speaking to the family solicitor, Felicity's father began investigating Malcolm's finances. What he found changed everything. Together, father and daughter searched through Malcolm's belongings and discovered a key to a private mailbox. Inside were damning documents. A bank statement showed that Malcolm had secretly moved 140,000 New Zealand dollars from a joint account into a personal one in Aberdeenshire. Credit card bills revealed he was drowning in debt. Felicity's father took immediate action, securing a court injunction that legally barred Malcolm from the family home. By the time it was served, Malcolm had vanished. He fled New Zealand just as Felicity began to uncover the full scope of the betrayal. Medical tests later confirmed what she had feared. Her body contained dangerously high levels of sedatives, drugs she had never knowingly taken. Once Malcolm was gone, the symptoms vanished as if they'd never existed. The man she had loved, trusted, and married had slowly and methodically poisoned her. Her suspicions, once only instinct, had now hardened into certainty. While searching through their shared email account, Felicity uncovered damning messages to a UK estate agent. Malcolm had been posing as a single father, planning a quiet relocation to Cornwall with their son. He was arranging to move by the end of 1999. He arranged to move out at the end of 1999. Not a word of this was shared with Felicity. Then came a discovery that changed everything. In the boot of the car Malcolm had abandoned, she found a petrol canister. It was the final piece. A horrifying realization dawned. He had intended to replicate the exact circumstances of his first wife, Claire's death. The plan had almost succeeded until her father's well-timed phone call had inadvertently saved her life. Felicity now understood the forest, the unconsciousness, the steering failure, the sedatives. It had all been part of a carefully rehearsed script. She managed to confront Malcolm once. Calmly, she told him she knew what he had tried to do. His reply chilled her to the bone. "You would have died happy." That sentence shattered any lingering doubts. Malcolm hadn't just deceived and manipulated her. He had plotted her death with methodical precision. For Felicity, the illusion was destroyed. She now knew she had married a murderer. She went straight to the police. In July 2000, New Zealand authorities issued 4 arrest warrants against Malcolm Webster. The charges were severe, including arson, drugging his wife, and administering substances with intent to cause harm. But Malcolm was already gone, having fled the country before he could face justice. From that point on, he was officially a wanted man. As the investigation unfolded, more details emerged. Felicity had only been aware of 1 life insurance policy, but Malcolm had secretly forged 8 more, with a combined value nearing 2 million New Zealand dollars. His motivation had always been clear: control, deception, and financial gain, no matter the cost. What he did next was true to form. In 2000, Malcolm slipped back into the United Kingdom. He confessed nothing to his family and resumed life as if nothing had happened. He found work, played the role of a respectable man, and once again sought out wealthy women. In August 2004, he met Simone Banerjee at a hospital. He worked in nurse administration. She managed the surgical theater. The two soon became a couple. By 2006, they were engaged. To Simone, Malcolm was a sensitive soul. He shared stories about his supposed battle with leukemia, disappearing for hours and claiming he'd been undergoing treatment. He told her of his tragic past, including the accidental death of his first wife, Claire. He even claimed certain television scenes fires. Car crashes were too traumatic to watch. Simone believed him. She had no idea he was still legally married to Felicity Drum, or that he was a fugitive in New Zealand, or that he had already tried to murder 2 women. But police hadn't stopped tracking him and found him living openly in Aberdeen under his real name. Simone might never have learned the truth had authorities not contacted her directly, warning her of the grave danger she was in. At first, she refused to believe it, but when she confronted Malcolm, he turned pale, packed a bag, mumbled an apology, and walked out. Malcolm Webster was arrested in July 2007 in Scotland. The investigation, known as Operation Field, became an international effort involving over 1,000 witness interviews across multiple countries. Prosecutors charged him with the murder of Claire Morris, the attempted murder of Felicity Drum, and attempting to marry Simone Banerjee under false pretenses to gain access to her estate. As part of the reopened case, Claire's body was exhumed. Forensic analysis revealed that, like Felicity, she had been heavily sedated before her death. This confirmed what many had suspected. Claire hadn't been able to escape the burning car because Malcolm had drugged her, incapacitating her. It was also revealed that Felicity was drugged, even while she was pregnant with their son. The trial would go down in Scottish legal history. It became the longest trial involving a single defendant the country had ever seen. In May 2011, Malcolm Webster was found guilty on all charges. On July 5, 2011, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 30 years. Simone later described herself as lucky to be alive. The courtroom testimonies painted a portrait of a man who used trust as a weapon, staging car crashes, setting fires, poisoning those closest to him, and weaving webs of lies for profit. Psychologists diagnosed him with narcissistic personality disorder, manipulative, deceitful, and utterly lacking in empathy. Even after his conviction, Malcolm refused to accept responsibility. In December 2013, he applied to the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission, hoping to have his sentence overturned. The process dragged on, but in February 2016, his request was officially rejected. The High Court saw no grounds for an appeal. After a comprehensive investigation into the events of Malcolm Webster's life, the authorities discovered that he had carried out a series of systematic and calculated crimes, mainly for financial gain, through fraud and murder. The investigation, known as Operation Field, spanned 5 years and involved interviews with more than 1,000 witnesses across several countries, revealing a terrifying pattern of manipulation. Malcolm poisoned his first wife, Claire Morris, with temazepam before staging a car crash in 1994 to collect $200,000 in insurance money, spending lavishly on a yacht and a Range Rover. He continued to poison his second wife, Felicity Drum, even when she was pregnant, and forged 9 insurance policies worth $750,000 while also setting 3 fires at her parents' home, a rented house, and a property he intended to buy. Authorities also discovered that Malcolm had attempted to enter into a sham marriage with Simone Banerjee to gain her wealth, with plans to drown her in a boat accident. He also had other relationships, including with Christina Willis, Anne Hancock, and a 15-year-old girl who ended up having an abortion, all of which he either deceived or exploited financially. In Abu Dhabi, Malcolm was suspected of injecting insulin to kill 3 children in his care, although evidence was lacking due to a culture that discouraged autopsies. He had lied about having cancer as a teenager, foreshadowing a decades-long scam. After his arrest in 2007, a search of Simone's home revealed stolen laptops and unlicensed guns. Malcolm was convicted in 2011 of murder, attempted murder, arson, burglary, fraud, poisoning, and attempted marriage fraud, removed from the nursing register in 2013, and attacked in prison, where he hired a hitman to protect him. These revelations exposed a manipulative psychopath diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder who showed no remorse even after being sentenced to life in prison. Malcolm Webster is currently serving his life sentence at a prison in Lanarkshire, Scotland. In Luton, Bedfordshire, United Kingdom, on the evening of Monday, May 23, 2016, a 34-year-old woman was brutally murdered inside her family home on Overstone Road. Saima Khan, a devoted mother of 4 young children, became the victim of a crime so savage that it shocked the entire community. She had been stabbed 68 times. The wounds were so vicious that her head and arm were nearly severed. From the outside, the Khan residence looked like an ordinary, modern family home, blending in with the other houses in the quiet, suburban street. But inside, officers encountered a scene of horrific carnage. Blood was everywhere, as if gallons had been splattered across the walls, stairs, and flaw. This story centers on the Khan family, originally from Pakistan. Saima, the elder, was born in 1982, while her younger sister, Sabah, was born 7 years later, in 1989. The family also included 2 brothers. They spent their early years in the Netherlands, but when Saima turned 18, the entire family relocated to England in search of better opportunities. The Khan household was traditional, yet modern. They maintained strong Islamic values and pride in their heritage, while also adapting to Western life. Both sisters grew up fluent in Dutch and later mastered English after the move. They shared a deep bond. Saima, known for her kindness and gentle nature, often looked after Sabah like a second mother. Sabah adored her older sister, once saying they were one soul divided between 2 bodies. When the family settled in Luton's Overstone Road, they joined a large Pakistani community. Luton, about 30 miles north of London, has one of the largest Muslim populations in the UK, with nearly a third of residents identifying as Muslim. Here, Saima pursued her dream of helping others by studying nursing. She had a natural gift for caregiving and wanted to dedicate her life to supporting those in need. After completing her training, she began working as a home care nurse. Patient described her as reliable, warm, and compassionate, a woman who radiated calm. The Khan family lived in a 2-story brick townhouse, typical of many European neighborhoods. Each apartment in this townhouse had a separate street-level entry. Such homes are commonly found in most European cities. By the time Saima turned 21, her parents began searching for a suitable husband for her. In keeping with tradition, they reached out to extended relatives in Pakistan. Arranged marriages are common among Pakistani families in the UK, sometimes even used as a means to secure British residency or citizenship. Many of these unions end unhappily, with young women, accustomed to Western freedoms, finding themselves in restrictive or even abusive marriages. But Saima's case was different. No one pressured her. She trusted her parents' judgment and agreed willingly. Family meant everything to her. She wanted to marry and start her own. Her future husband was Hafiz Rahman, a man 3 years older than her and 10 years older than Sabah. Hafiz had lived his entire life in Pakistan and was considered by relatives to be a respectable match for Saima. Hafiz's family hoped that moving to Britain would give him more opportunities and a better life. By marrying a British resident, Hafiz would be able to secure a British passport and become a full-fledged citizen of the United Kingdom. After the wedding in Pakistan, Hafiz and Saima returned together to the United Kingdom. The newlyweds moved into the Khan family home, following the cultural custom in many Muslim households of living as one large, close-knit family. Hafiz eventually gained citizenship and found work as a taxi driver. He held firmly to traditional values, expecting his wife to bear children, raise them, care for her husband, prepare meals, and manage the household. Saima, however, never intended to give up her career entirely. She balanced her duties as a wife with her work caring for patients. Not long after their marriage, she became pregnant with their first child, a daughter. Before she could fully recover from that pregnancy, more followed in quick succession. In the end, they had 4 children, 2 daughters and 2 sons. 3 generations of the family lived together under one roof, supporting and caring for each other. In total, 11 people shared the townhouse. Hafiz, Saima, and their 4 children, Saima's parents, her 2 brothers, and her younger sister, Sabah. On the surface, life seemed to be going well, apart from the ordinary domestic disagreements that occur in any household, especially one so large. At some point, however, Sabah began to feel growing tension with her sister. The shift started after Saima's marriage to Hafiz. Once she became a wife and mother, Saima's priorities naturally changed. To Saba, it felt like her sister no longer made time for her, focusing instead on her husband and children. Over time, Saba grew weary of living in her older sister's shadow. Within this crowded household, a secret began to take shape. Known only to two people, Saba had fallen in love with her sister's husband, Hafiz. Shockingly, he reciprocated, despite the 10-year age gap, despite the taboo of Saba being his wife's younger sister, and despite the fact that they all lived together under one roof. The two embarked on a passionate affair. Their attraction quickly consumed them both. It started innocently enough, fleeting glances, playful teasing, the rush of a forbidden thrill. Hafiz, more experienced, recognized what lay behind the young girl's looks. In truth, he exploited her immaturity and naivety. The affair began shortly after the birth of Saima's first child. Exhausted and fully absorbed in caring for her newborn daughter, Saima didn't notice the way her younger sister was looking at her husband. At the time, the sisters still had a fairly warm relationship. Saba even helped look after the baby, playing the role of a loving aunt, while secretly melting into the arms of her sister's husband. Whenever no one was watching, the secret relationship carried on for years. It would occasionally end, only to resume with even greater intensity as time passed. Saba became increasingly obsessed with Hafiz. They relied on WhatsApp to communicate, the only way to conceal their affair within a household filled with family members. With each passing wave of passion, the relationship grew more volatile as jealousy of her sister deepened. She was consumed with rage whenever she saw Hafiz giving Saima attention. She complained bitterly that he could message her day and night, yet could never find enough time to be alone with her. The affair was dangerously complicated. The tight-knit family, all living under one roof, turned the house into a pressure cooker, a volcano on the verge of erupting. And though the affair unfolded right under their noses, no one seemed to notice. Or perhaps they simply chose to look away, pretending nothing was wrong. Most likely, the relatives simply thought any possibility of an affair between Saba and Hafiz was unthinkable. Their upbringing and faith didn't even allow them to imagine such a thing. Saima herself paid no attention to the strange glances between her husband and younger sister. She was a devoted mother of 4, juggling childcare with part-time caregiving work, exhausted and overburdened. She had neither the time nor the energy to keep watch over her husband, and she certainly never suspected such a betrayal from her own sister, whom she had loved, cared for since childhood. Meanwhile, Hafiz and Saba would steal moments together whenever Saima was away. Sometimes they used the taxi Hafiz drove for work. Other times, they met in the family's marital bedroom. At that point, the children were 7, 4, 2, and 1 years old. Since Saba often stayed home to help care for them, her presence in the bedroom didn't raise suspicion. Hafiz, with the flexibility of his taxi shifts, deliberately arranged his time off to coincide with his wife's working hours. Though their affair carried on for years, Hafiz still put his wife first. This infuriated Saba. At one point, Hafiz even considered marrying Saba as a second wife. But when he consulted a local imam, he was told it was forbidden in Islam to marry 2 sisters at the same time. So Hafiz abandoned the idea and continued meeting Saba in secret. For him, she became the ultimate forbidden fruit, young, naive, and forbidden by custom from having any relationship before marriage to Hafiz. This only made the affair more intoxicating. A few months into the relationship, Saba became pregnant. Hafiz, who refused to use contraception, insisted she terminate the pregnancy to avoid scandal and keep their affair hidden. Saba went through with the abortion, but the experience left scars. It may also have been the moment Hafiz realized that continuing an affair with his wife's younger sister was unsustainable. By February 2016, after 4 years of secret meetings, Hafiz decided to end the affair and recommit to his wife and children. He began considering moving his family into their own home, away from the crowded household, but the very thought of losing him drove Saba into despair. She couldn't bear the idea that Hafiz had chosen his wife and children over her. That desperation soon twisted into something darker. Saba began obsessively searching online for ways to remove her sister from the picture. In her mind, Saima was the only obstacle between herself and Hafiz. Without Saima, Saba imagined she could step into her place, becoming his wife and raising the children as her own. Her internet searches grew more alarming. She looked up where to buy venomous snakes, studied différents poisons, researched how to hire hitmen, and even pored over an article titled 16 Steps to End Someone's Life and Not Get Caught. In March 2016, Saba reached out to a self-proclaimed sorcerer in Pakistan who claimed he could kill through black magic. Saba paid the so-called sorcerer more than $6,000 to place a deadly curse on Saima. When nothing happened, Saba grew furious. She contacts the self-proclaimed wizard again, complaining that her life is getting worse. Hafiz no longer cares about her and seems completely indifferent. She begged him to hurry and finish off her sister so that Hafiz would finally be hers. But after she sent the money for this final ritual, the sorcerer disappeared. He had been nothing more than an online scammer. Saba couldn't bear the thought of losing Hafiz forever. To her, he was her soulmate, the man for whom she had broken Islamic rules, endured an abortion, and done things most women would never dare. Worse still, her parents had started pressing the issue of marriage for her. Talks had been ongoing for months, with a potential suitor already identified, but negotiations stalled because the families couldn't agree on the terms. Even so, the pressure was immense. As much as she loved Hafiz, openly defying her parents was nearly impossible. She felt trapped, beaten down by blow after blow. To make matters worse, she had to watch her sister Saima live the life everyone envied. A devoted husband, 4 beautiful children, and what looked like the perfect marriage. By contrast, Saba was unmarried, childless, and directionless. Resentment festered, and soon her envy turned into rage. She began to blame Saima for everything that had gone wrong in her life. Those emotions drowned out any last trace of reason. For Saba, it felt like her sister was stealing the very life she deserved. To her twisted mind, the only solution was to remove Saima from the picture once and for all. Meanwhile, Saima and Hafiz had found a new apartment across Luton where they planned to move with their children. The moving date was already set, May 25th, 2016. By then, Hafiz had grown colder towards Saba, pouring more energy into repairing his marriage. In a desperate bid to win him back, Saba sent him anguished love messages. She wrote that no force on earth could change her feelings, that her heart was bleeding for him, and that she would do anything to prove her devotion. But behind these messages lurked a darker determination. If Hafiz wouldn't come back to her willingly, she would carve her own path to a happy ending. Saba decided to take matters into her own hands. On May 21st, 2016, she went to a supermarket and bought a large knife. She knew that on the evening of May 23rd, her parents, brothers, and Hafiz would all be away at a funeral at the local mosque, mourning a recently deceased relative. Saima couldn't attend because she had caregiving duties that night. Saba was left in charge of the children, a perfect setup for the plan she had been plotting. That night, once the children were asleep upstairs, the house was hers. She waited, knife ready, needing only to lure her sister home early. At 10:15 p.m., Saima left for work. Around 11, Saba sent her a text, pretending the youngest child was inconsolable and crying for her mother. 3 minutes later, Saima replied that she was on her way back. In reality, all 4 children were sound asleep. At 11:07 p.m., a neighbor's security camera caught Saima pulling into the driveway, stepping out of her car and walking toward the front door. Seconds later, the hallway light inside flicked on. 45 seconds after that, it went dark again. Within those few minutes, Saima Khan was ambushed in her own home. The moment Saima stepped through the front door and into the ground floor hallway, she had no idea that death was waiting just a few feet away. In an instant, her younger sister Saba lunged at her with the knife she had deliberately purchased the day before at the supermarket. Saima, caught completely off guard, lost those precious seconds that might have saved her life. She never expected her own sister to be the source of such danger, and the shock robbed her of the ability to defend herself. As the first blows landed, she struggled in vain, but the frenzied assault quickly overwhelmed her. Investigators would later confirm that Saima likely died within the first few minutes of the attack, screams that were quickly drowned out by the relentless violence of her assailant. Saba's rage knew no limits. She stabbed and slashed with such ferocity that by the end, Saima's body bore 68 separate wounds. The injuries were so savage that Saima's throat was cut almost completely through, leaving her close to decapitation. Even after her sister collapsed, Saba continued the onslaught, tearing off parts of her clothing and striking with such brutal force that one of Saima's arms was left hanging by little more than tissue and sinew. Upstairs, the eldest daughter was jolted awake. Frightened, she came to the top of the stairs and called out, asking her aunt what was happening. Sabah, in the middle of her gruesome act, snapped at the child, coldly ordering her back to bed and dismissing the horrific sounds as nothing more than her trying to catch a mouse. The little girl obeyed, unaware that her mother was being slaughtered just a few steps below. By then, Saima had lost massive amounts of blood. Several arteries in her jugular vein were severed. Her face, head, and arm were horribly mutilated. In the frenzy, Saba herself suffered a small cut, though she barely noticed. When the killing was over, she quickly moved on to the next phase of her plan, staging the crime as a robbery gone wrong. She smashed a pane of glass on the back door to make it look like an intruder had forced entry. Then she stripped off her bloodied clothing, stuffed it into a plastic bag along with the knife, Saima's phone, and some jewelry, and hid the items in her bedroom. Calmly, she showered, washing away the evidence of Saima's blood. Only after cleaning herself up did she call her parents and then dial emergency services. When her family rushed home, they were met with a nightmare. Saima lay in the hallway in a pool of blood, her life gone. The brutality of the scene shocked even the paramedics. The wounds were so severe that police initially believed the killer must have been a man. The first step for investigators was to question the only adult who had been in the house that night, Saima's younger sister, Sabah Khan. She recited her version of events with a calm, almost practiced tone. She explained, that evening, everyone else had been out. Her parents, brothers, and brother-in-law Hafiz had gone to a funeral at the mosque. While Saima had gone to work, Sabah had stayed behind to watch the children. She told detectives that she had put the children to bed, though the youngest had fussed a little, prompting her to message Saima and ask her to come home sooner. By the time the baby fell asleep, Sabah said she saw Saima's car pull into the driveway. Relieved, she decided to take a shower. According to her story, moments later, she heard a loud noise and her sister's screams. Throwing on a robe, she rushed downstairs and found Saima lying bloodied in the hallway. That was when she insisted She phoned her parents and then called emergency services. When officers asked about the cut on her hand, she claimed she had injured herself on shards of glass near the broken back door. She said she hadn't seen or heard any intruder. On the surface, her explanation seemed plausible. The smashed glass, the missing jewelry, and the horrific scene were consistent with a violent burglary, yet detectives couldn't ignore the details that didn't add up. Saba's demeanor struck them as oddly detached, almost rehearsed. Given the brutality of what had just happened, her lack of visible grief or panic raised quiet suspicions, though investigators reminded themselves that people cope with trauma in different ways. Still, one fact remained clear: this was no ordinary crime. The sheer ferocity of the attack, dozens of stab wounds, the attempt to mutilate, did not resemble a panicked burglar. It looked personal. It looked like vengeance. The entire family experienced incredible grief from losing a loved one. Hafiz was beside himself. He spoke about how their shared dream of moving into a new apartment with their 4 children had been cruelly destroyed. Both he and Saima had been counting down the days to that move, looking forward to starting a happier chapter together. Now, that future had been stolen from them forever. Relatives, friends, and even police officers pleaded with the public for any information that might help track down the killer who had ripped away the life of a devoted mother. The whole community of Luton and the surrounding areas was shaken to its core. Hafiz himself gave an emotional statement, saying their family's hearts had been torn to pieces. What he didn't know at the time was that the true motive behind Saima's murder was tied to his own secret. The autopsy results painted a horrific picture. Saima had been stabbed 68 times. Forensic experts concluded that she likely died after the first few blows, but the attacker kept plunging the knife into her body again and again. Long after death, detectives were convinced this wasn't the work of a burglar. A random intruder would never waste precious time inflicting so many wounds after the victim was already gone. This was personal. This was rage. With that in mind, detectives decided to revisit the testimony of their key witness, Sabah Khan. Sabah had been close to her sister, and investigators wanted to hear her version of events again. During questioning, Sabah told them that Saima had a dark secret, a secret lover. She even suggested that this man might have been the one to ambush and murder Saima. But instead of deflecting suspicion, her story had the opposite effect. Detectives noticed how Sabah seemed almost eager to smear her sister's reputation at a time when Saima could no longer defend herself. The claim didn't sit right. Family members, neighbors, and friends had all spoken about Saima's character. They were adamant she would never cheat on Hafiz. In fact, her life revolved around her children, her husband, and her part-time job. She barely had the time, let alone the energy, to pursue an affair. Still, investigators considered every angle. Could this have been an honor killing? The sheer brutality of the attack led some to believe the perpetrator was male. To narrow down suspects, police mapped out the movements of each family member in the days before the crime and seized electronic devices from the household. It didn't take long before damning evidence began to surface. Detectives discovered that Sabah had recently purchased a knife at a local supermarket, the very same model used in the attack. A review of her Google searches and phone data revealed an even darker truth. Sabah had been carrying on a secret affair with Hafiz for the past 4 years. Their text messages left no doubt. Sabah had often written about her hatred and resentment toward her sister, even accusing Hafiz of marrying Saima only to secure a passport. Their relationship had become so volatile that Hafiz eventually blocked her on social media. The case was unraveling quickly. On May 31, 2016, just 8 days after Saima's murder, detectives conducted a thorough search of Sabah's bedroom. What they found erased any remaining doubt. Hidden inside were the pieces of jewelry supposedly stolen during the staged robbery. Even more damning, they uncovered Saima's missing phone, the blood-stained knife, and clothing Saba had worn on the night of the murder. Still soaked in Saima's blood, Saba was arrested immediately. At first, she denied having any part in Saima's death. Though she admitted to the affair with Hafiz, she tried to claim that the relationship had ended after a failed pregnancy and that she had distanced herself from him. Still, she clung to the story of a robbery gone wrong. But the irrefutable evidence found in her room made this claim difficult to support. After several rounds of interrogation, Saba finally broke down. She confessed to killing Saima. In her statement, she painted herself as a victim, saying Hafiz had manipulated her for years, even abused her physically, and that she felt trapped in a relationship with a man 10 years older, more experienced, and impossible to resist. The trial took place in October 2017, and it was there that Saba Khan finally admitted the truth. She pleaded guilty to the murder of her own sister. Prosecutors laid out the chilling details of her motive. What began as an infatuation with Hafiz Rahman had grown into a dangerous, obsessive fixation. She could no longer stand the fact that Hafiz belonged to someone else. In her mind, Saima's life looked flawless. Married, with children, and a stable home, while she herself remained in the shadows. That resentment turned into rage. Hafiz, taking the witness stand, described himself as a victim of manipulation. He admitted that he had made the grave mistake of giving in to Saba's advances, but he claimed he had been trapped by her threats. According to him, Saba often said she would harm herself if he ever left her, bombarding him with messages filled with desperate declarations of love. Despite his testimony about wanting to end things, prosecutors highlighted the undeniable fact that Hafiz had still continued sleeping with Saba. Even in the days leading up to the murder, the defense tried to shift some of the blame onto Hafiz. Saba's lawyer argued that Hafiz had taken advantage of a vulnerable young woman, one who had little experience with men and suffered from mental health struggles. He painted Saba as lonely, unstable, and desperate, reminding the court that she had a history of self-harm. According to the defense, Hafiz had strung her along for years, feeding her false hope of a future together, only to retreat when things became too complicated. Saba himself showed no remorse. Not a tear, not a trace of remorse. She sat motionless in the defendant's box, her face expressionless, her eyes hollow. It was clear she wasn't mourning Saima's stolen life. She was mourning her own freedom. Saba Khan was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years. The defense immediately sought an appeal, calling the sentence excessively harsh, but the appeals commission disagreed. The punishment, they said, was just. And so, Saba Khan remains behind bars in Bedfordshire, UK, where she will spend the best years of her life reflecting on the crime that destroyed her family. After the trial, Hafiz released a statement. He said he could never have imagined such horror unfolding within his own family. He admitted his deep shame for betraying his wife and confessed that not a day passes without regret. Hafiz remembered Saima as a devoted wife, a loving mother of 4 beautiful children, a daughter who made her parents proud, and a sister whose kindness touched everyone around her. He sighed. Her death left a permanent wound in the hearts of everyone who loved her. For her parents, the pain was almost unbearable. Losing one daughter is tragedy enough, but learning that another daughter was responsible, that was a nightmare no family should ever endure. And that brings us to the end of this tragic story, a story of jealousy, betrayal, and a family torn apart forever. In Mexico, a 14-year-old girl tragically lost her life after undergoing a cosmetic surgery she never asked for. Her name was Paloma. Her story has deeply resonated across social media, sparking critical debates about ethics, medical responsibility, and the limits of aesthetic procedures, especially when performed on minors who lack the legal capacity to give consent. As surgery, common in a society focused on looks, has turned into a case involving alleged cover-ups, conflicts of interest, and decisions that drastically impacted a family. Paloma Nicole Arellano Escobedo was born on January 14, 2011, in Durango, Mexico. Her parents were Carlos Yasmin Arellano and Paloma Jasmine Escobedo. Jasmine also had an older son from a previous relationship. Paloma and her father, Carlos, had a very loving relationship. When Paloma was 4 years old, Carlos and Jasmine separated. From that moment on, Jasmine maintained shared custody, and Carlos remained an active presence in his daughter's life. According to Carlos, at first, his ex-wife strictly followed the visitation schedule set by the court, allowing him to see Paloma only on weekends. Over time, however, things became more flexible. Carlos began picking her up from school every day. Their daily routine was well established. Jasmine would collect Paloma at noon for lunch, take her to her extracurricular activities in the afternoon, and then Carlos would pick her up in the evening and take her home. During this period, rumors began circulating in town that their breakup had been caused by Jasmine's alleged affair with Dr. Victor Manuel Rosales. According to several accounts, when Victor's wife discovered the infidelity, she repeatedly confronted Carlos about it. Victor was a well-known figure in Durango. In addition to being a plastic surgeon, he was also the son of a former judicial official who had served as a judge in the Second Commercial Court of First Instance. Yet, a disturbing rumor had long shadowed his reputation, that years earlier, he had operated on his own mother, who allegedly died during the procedure. Jasmine and Victor soon made their relationship public, eventually moving in together. Victor became the stepfather to Paloma and her half-brother. Meanwhile, Paloma grew into a bright, cheerful, energetic teenager. She excelled academically, showed a natural talent for sports. In March 2025, she and her volleyball team won a school tournament, a victory that filled her with pride. Her intelligence, sense of responsibility, and leadership skills led to her election as class president. Friends, teachers alike described her as confident, kind, always smiling. To her father, she was an exemplary daughter. Everyone in Durango seemed to adore her. By mid-2025, Paloma had one major dream: to celebrate her 15th birthday in grand style. Beyond the party, she often told her father she wanted to travel to Europe. As plans for her quinceañera progressed, with January 30th, 2026 set as the date, Carlos surprised her with a gift she would never forget: a trip abroad together. He told her she deserved it more than anyone. The trip was later rescheduled for mid-March 2026. Everything seemed perfect, but Jasmine, her mother, had another gift, one so unexpected, so irreversible, that it would ultimately change Paloma's life forever. On Thursday, September 11th, Carlos received a call from his ex-wife, Yasmin, who told him that Paloma's school had contacted her, reporting that their daughter was feeling unwell and showing symptoms consistent with global respiratory disease. She asked Carlos to pick her up, but because he was busy at work, he asked Jasmine to handle it instead. Jasmine took Paloma to a nearby clinic to determine whether she had it or something else. Later that day, she called Carlos again, saying that Paloma had tested positive, even sending him a photo of the test result as proof. Not long after, Jasmine contacted him once more. This time, she explained that she had decided to take Paloma to a remote house in the mountains for a few days. 3 or 4 at most, so she could isolate and avoid spreading the infection. She reassured Carlos that everything was fine, but warned him they would be out of contact because there was no phone signal in the area. Carlos accepted the explanation, never imagining the truth behind it. After the weekend, on Monday afternoon, September 15th, Jasmine called again, her voice tense and urgent. She told Carlos that Paloma had fallen seriously ill and had been hospitalized. Assuming they were still in the mountains, Carlos initially thought Paloma might have been bitten by an animal or had some kind of allergic reaction. Jasmine didn't offer many details, only telling him to come to the hospital immediately. When Carlos arrived, he found Jasmine standing outside the building. Desperate, he asked what had happened, but she said nothing. He demanded to see his daughter, but Jasmine warned that the doctors wouldn't allow it. Carlos ignored her. He told the staff at reception, and he was allowed to enter the intensive care unit. Inside, he was met with a sight that froze him in place. Paloma lay in an induced coma, intubated, her eyes swollen, her body disfigured and bloated beyond recognition. Shocked, Carlos could barely breathe. Doctors explained that Paloma had suffered cardiac arrest, cerebral edema, and that Paloma had undergone cosmetic surgery. Carlos was speechless. He had never authorized any procedure and had no idea such an operation had even been planned. Then, everything began to make sense. The fake global respiratory disease diagnosis, the sudden isolation, the lack of communication, it had all been a lie, carefully constructed to hide the truth. Doctors told him that Paloma had been admitted to the hospital on Saturday, September 13th, still alive, but in critical condition. Now, 2 days later, her situation was deteriorating fast. Her heart had stopped once. Her brain had been deprived of oxygen for too long. They were doing everything possible, but there was little hope. Carlos refused to leave her side. He spent every hour in the hospital, holding her hand, whispering to her, begging her to wake up. Outside, Jasmine and Victor, the surgeon and Jasmine's partner, remained distant, avoiding him completely. Days passed, but Paloma's condition didn't improve. The swelling in her brain was too severe, the damage irreversible. Finally, after multiple consultations and desperate prayers, Carlos faced the hardest decision of his life. On September 20th, after doctors confirmed there was no brain activity, he agreed to disconnect the machines, keeping his daughter alive. At 2:35 p.m., surrounded only by her father and medical staff, Paloma Nicole Arellano Escobedo passed away. She was just 14 years old. The wake was held the next day, September 21st. Family members, classmates, teachers, and volleyball teammates came to say goodbye. In a gesture that Carlos would later describe as impossible to comprehend, Dr. Victor attended the funeral, silent, emotionless, offering neither an apology nor an explanation. On the same day, an autopsy was performed on Paloma's body. Even though it had already been handled by the funeral home, the preliminary report confirmed cerebral edema and lung damage consistent with surgical complications. But for Carlos, the nightmare was only beginning. He feared the influence, power that Dr. Victor wielded, both through his professional connections and his family's judicial background. His fears proved valid. That same Victor appeared at the prosecutor's office to give his statement, flanked by lawyers and a large private security detail. Witness described his demeanor as arrogant, entirely devoid of remorse. The forensic doctor who performed the autopsy confirmed not only that surgery had taken place, but also provided explicit details of the procedures: breast implants, abdominal liposuction, and a fat transfer to the buttocks. All of this, he testified, had been approved and signed for by Paloma's mother. whose signature appeared on the clinic's consent forms. Upon confirming that his suspicions were true, even more questions began to torment Carlos. Why had they hidden something so serious from him? And how could Victor have the audacity to attend his daughter's funeral, standing in silence as though nothing had happened? Of course, Carlos couldn't ignore the obvious. Being the son of a powerful family, Victor likely felt untouchable, shielded from any consequences his actions might bring. By then, authorities had begun to question the accuracy of Paloma's death certificate, suspecting that it had been intentionally falsified. Yet Carlos's worst fears seemed to come true when the president of the State Commission for the Protection Against Health Risks publicly stated that his office had no obligation to determine whether negligence had occurred. Even worse, he defended the clinic, claiming that it had complied with all medical, anesthetic, hospitalization protocols, and that the surgery had been performed with the proper consent of the legal representative. As the story spread through state and national media, public outrage exploded. News outlets denounced the negligence, the deception, and the complicity that seemed to run deep. Carlos, meanwhile, gave multiple interviews in which he firmly maintained that his daughter had never expressed any desire to undergo cosmetic surgery. Determined to fight for justice in Paloma's name, he began organizing protests, public demonstrations, demanding accountability from the authorities. Amid growing pressure, the state prosecutor, who had already met with Carlos several times, assured the public that the investigation would proceed without interference, corruption, or favoritism. She emphasized that no case would go to court until all expert analyses were completed, ensuring that those responsible would have no chance to escape justice. Soon after, the investigation unveiled even more disturbing truths. In an official statement, the prosecutor's office revealed that the global respiratory disease test, used as an excuse to isolate Paloma, was actually forged, a fake, created using a positive result from 2022. Further investigation confirmed that Jasmine and Victor had planned the surgery in secret, never informing or seeking consent from Paloma's biological father. They had built an elaborate deception. The school was told Paloma felt unwell, while the girl herself, under adult influence, went along with the story. The supposed trip to the mountains had been nothing but a cover-up to carry out the surgery. Records showed that the operation was performed on Saturday, September 12th, and by the following day, Paloma's condition had already begun to deteriorate. Then came the most shocking revelation of all. Jasmine had participated directly in her daughter's operation, despite having no medical training or credentials whatsoever. Investigators discovered her name listed in the surgery logbook as a nursing assistant, a role she was not licensed to perform. Even more horrifying, this was not the first time. Authorities uncovered that Jasmine had been involved in similar, unauthorized procedures before, even posting photos from the operating room to her social media accounts. As the evidence mounted, both Jasmine and Victor were arrested. She was charged with negligence, document falsification, and professional impersonation, while he faced accusations of medical malpractice, abandonment, and usurpation of parental authority for signing surgical consent forms as though he were Paloma's legal guardian. Following their formal indictment, neither spoke publicly about the case. However, it soon became known that both defendants had requested permission to await trial in freedom, a request the judge ultimately denied. They were ordered to remain in preventive detention as the investigation continued. The prosecutor's office announced that the investigation would extend for at least 3 months. Meanwhile, as public outrage grew and media coverage intensified, the Mexican Association of Plastic, Aesthetic, and Reconstructive Surgery broke its silence. In an official statement, the association confirmed that it had requested Dr. Victor Manuel Rosales' temporary suspension from his duties as a practicing member until the investigation concludes. In response, legislators from Durango, other states, even the federal Congress proposed drafting what they called Nicole's Law, a reform aimed at tightening regulations and preventing such tragedies from ever happening again. For now, as the prosecutor's office continues to gather evidence and complete expert analyses, Jasmine and Victor remain in preventive detention. A final sentence is expected to be handed down in early 2026. But for Carlos, no verdict will ever be enough. No prison sentence can bring back his daughter, the girl who was about to turn 15, the volleyball champion, the class president, the child who dreamed of traveling to Europe with her father. The case of Paloma, Nicole Arellano Escobedo, has laid bare profound failures in medical regulation, parental responsibility, and the protection of minors. It has shown how easily the system can be manipulated when those involved possess connections and influence. It forces us to confront unsettling questions about the cosmetic surgery industry and obsession with beauty, about the ethics of performing medical procedures on minors, about informed consent and who truly has the right to decide what happens to a child's body. Yet beyond all the legal arguments and proposed reforms, this remains the story of a young girl who lost her life in an operating room, subjected to procedures she never wanted. Authorized by those who should have protected her most, Paloma Nicole should be preparing for her 15th birthday in January 2026. She should be packing for her trip to Europe, playing volleyball with her team, and sharing that confident smile that everyone remembers. Instead, she is gone. Her father continues to fight, not only for her memory, but for every child who might face the same fate. The investigation continues, the trial awaits, and the world watches, hoping that this time, justice will triumph over privilege, truth over deceit. In the quiet streets of New Haven, Indiana, what began as an ordinary night between a married couple soon turned into a scene of horror. A blood-soaked staircase, a frantic call to 911, a husband barely clinging to life, his wife's calm voice telling dispatchers, "Have fell," but nothing about that night felt like an accident. The bruises, broken bones, and her unsettling calmness all suggested something more sinister beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect marriage. Friends who once saw Kevin and Allison Davis as the ideal couple began to wonder, had love turned deadly inside their home on Douglas Lane? By morning, Kevin was dead. Allison was a widow and a suspect. What followed was a tangled story of conflicting accounts, haunting evidence, and one question that still divides their Indiana community: was it a tragic fall, or a deliberate murder? Kevin Davis was born on July 1, 1983, to his mother, Alta Beers. From an early age, everyone liked him. His friends described him as kind, hard-working, and always willing to help others. At the age of 40, Kevin worked as a gardener and had a stable life in New Haven, Indiana. One day, he met Allison by chance. They fell in love, got married, and lived together in a house on Douglas Lane. They didn't have children, but adored their pit bull mix, Willow, whom they treated like family. To their friends, Kevin and Allison seemed like a happy couple with a full, active life. Jason Young, a friend of Kevin's, said he could sometimes be loud and opinionated, but it was all part of his personality. Allison worked in retail at Victoria's Secret, where she made everyone feel welcome and valued. She and Kevin often affectionately called each other babe. Everything about their life looked happy and stable. But beneath that surface, something dark was brewing. On the evening of Friday, August 11, 2023, Kevin arrived at East Haven Tavern around 9 p.m. Taking his usual seat at the bar, while waiting for Allison to finish work. When she arrived, they greeted each other warmly. Their friend, Jason, was also there, and the three of them enjoyed drinks and laughed all night long. Kevin had a few beers and vodka shots, while Allison sipped her usual sweet cocktail. Bartenders said the night seemed completely ordinary. Around 1 o'clock emission, on August 12, Allison left first, with Kevin following soon after. They both headed home to Douglas Lane, ready to call it a night, but within hours, everything changed. At 1:11 a.m., Kevin texted Jason after getting home. Jason asked if they made it back safely. Kevin apologized and said everything was fine. He was just listening to music. They kept chatting for over an hour, with Kevin sounding cheerful and joking around. Finally, at 2:31 a.m., Kevin sent one last text saying he was going to put his phone on silent because he needed to go to sleep. Between 2:31 a.m. and 4:38 a.m., something terrifying happened inside Kevin and Allison's home. At 4:38 a.m., Allison called 911. The call lasted about a minute. In a calm tone, she told the dispatcher that her husband had just fallen down the stairs, that there was blood everywhere, and that she couldn't flip him over. She added that she didn't know whether he was alive or dead. Detective James Kruger later said the call sounded rehearsed. Allison never asked dispatchers to hurry, and he believed her tone was more focused on herself than on Kevin. Officers Garrett Shanebrook and Corporal Cade Hetrick arrived within minutes. Allison met them outside and led them in. At the bottom of the staircase, they found Kevin lying face down in a large pool of blood. Blood covered the walls, railing, and floor. With spatter reaching high above the stairs, Kevin was barely breathing, with blood flowing from his nose and mouth. His body temperature was 91 degrees Fahrenheit, dangerously low compared to the normal 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Corporal Cade Hetrick, who witnessed the scene, commented that this didn't look like a fall to him. There were no signs in the house that suggested a hard fall. No damaged railings, broken furniture, or dents in the walls. Kevin's body was lying flat, not twisted or wedged, as one might expect from a fall. The amount of blood made Hetrick ask Allison if there were any firearms in the house. Fearing Kevin might have shot himself, Allison confirmed there were firearms, but none were found near Kevin's body. Paramedics rushed Kevin to Parkview Regional Medical Center, but Allison's behavior immediately struck them as unusual. While talking to paramedics, she was laughing. She didn't seem worried about her husband's injuries. No tears, no attempt to ride in the ambulance. Detective Kruger was present at the scene and began the interrogation. Allison said that around 1 o'clock a.m., after returning from the bar, she and Kevin got into an argument. Kevin went upstairs to sleep, and she lay on the living room sofa. She said she woke up to a loud noise and found Kevin lying at the bottom of the stairs, thinking he was just drunk and had fallen. Allison agreed to let Kruger search the house and signed a permit. However, she warned him not to enter a room upstairs because of a guard dog named Willow. She said she did not want to go near that room. Kruger agreed not to enter the room where Willow was staying. When he opened the door slightly, Willow growled and bared her teeth. The dog wouldn't let him in. Other than that, the house appeared normal, and Kruger believed Allison's story that Kevin's fall had been a tragic accident caused by intoxication. The crime scene was cleared the same day. Allison's father, Steve Krauser, came over to clean up the blood, wanting to help his daughter in her grief. Meanwhile, Kevin's condition at the hospital worsened. His mother, Alta Beers, had received a text from Allison early that morning saying, "There's been an accident." Alta texted back for details, but got no response and went back to sleep. Assuming it wasn't serious, around 6:30 a.m., Alta finally spoke to Allison by phone and was surprised by how calm she sounded. Allison's tone made Alta believe that everything was fine, but it wasn't. Kevin's friends, Jason and Todd Spessert, hurried to the hospital. They spoke with Allison and her parents. Jason thought Allison had been crying, but was trying to hold herself together. Todd said she looked distraught. Inside Kevin's room, Allison stood by his bedside, calling to him as her father watched helplessly. Kevin suffered his third cardiac arrest that evening. At 10:07 p.m. on August 12, 2023, doctors removed him from life support. 40-year-old Kevin Davis was gone. Allison, 33, was now a widow. Friends were heartbroken. Everyone believed it had to be an accident, a terrible fall. But 3 days later, everything changed. On August 15, 2023, Dr. Scott Wagner performed Kevin's autopsy and discovered devastating injuries. The right side of Kevin's skull was crushed, with several fractures. The injuries were confined to his head. No other trauma was found. Dr. Wagner determined the damage was consistent with a fall from at least 20 feet or a high-speed car crash. The injuries would have rendered Kevin unconscious within seconds and brain dead upon impact. He concluded that Kevin's wounds could not have been caused by a fall down a normal staircase. The evidence suggested Kevin had been struck in the head with a blunt object. The Allen County Coroner's Office ruled Kevin's death a homicide on October 17, 2023, caused by blunt force trauma to the head. Detective Kruger sat in his office, processing the information. If Kevin was murdered, it meant someone else did it, and the only person with him that night was Allison. Kruger reviewed the text messages between Kevin and Allison. When he read Kevin's last text message to his wife, he felt that there was something unusual about the content, not at all gentle. Kruger sensed tension between them. Then he discovered something even more troubling. Allison had given conflicting accounts of what happened that night. To police, Allison claimed she and Kevin had been drinking and argued after returning home. She said she slept on the couch while Kevin went upstairs. To Kevin's mother, Alta, Allison claimed Kevin had not been drinking and that they had been in bed upstairs when Kevin got up for water and accidentally fell down the stairs. To Kevin's brother, Allison said that she was in bed with her dog, Willow, and heard Kevin moving around but didn't pay attention because Willow was still lying there. She only went to check on Kevin later and found him fallen. And to the medics, Allison said she hadn't heard anything and hadn't seen Kevin for some time before finding his body. The stories contradicted one another, and Kruger believed Allison had been caught lying. Doctors also found something alarming. Kevin's body temperature was so low upon arrival at the hospital that he was hypothermic, and his brain had almost no oxygen. One doctor said she had seen drowning victims with higher oxygen levels than Kevin. This suggested Kevin may have been brain dead for hours before Allison called 911. 4 weeks after Kevin's death, Kruger met with his mother, Alta. She told him that Kevin and Allison were having marital problems and were possibly about to separate. This reinforced Kruger's suspicions. He believed that Allison had lost control and beaten her husband to death, possibly with a blunt object such as a kettlebell, dumbbell, or baseball bat, and then staged the crime by dragging his body down the stairs. However, no weapon was ever recovered. Kruger theorized that it might have been hidden in the upstairs bedroom with Willow, a room he hadn't searched. The thought haunted him. Kruger admitted that he completely regretted not having searched that room on the morning of the 12th, and that the murder weapon could have been there on December 22, 2023. A warrant was issued for Allison's arrest. 3 days before Christmas, she arrived at the Allen County Jail with her parents and told the officers that she was Allison Davis and that she was there to turn herself in. She was handcuffed in front of them. Allison was charged with murder and held without bond. For the next 17 months, she remained in jail, able to see her family only during attorney visits through plexiglass. There were no video calls or regular visits, only waiting. From her cell, Allison told loved ones she couldn't sleep because she kept reliving that morning. She said she missed Kevin deeply and longed to hear him call her babe again. The prosecution believed their case was solid, but the defense saw things differently. On May 6, 2025, Allison Davis went on trial for murder. Chief Deputy Prosecutor Tissa Helge presented Dr. Bill Smoke as her key witness. Dr. Smoke, known for testifying in high-profile cases, including those of Derek Chauvin and Robert Feldman, was described as a police surgeon showing the jury CT scans of Kevin's skull. Dr. Smoke testified that Kevin had suffered multiple blows to various areas of his head. He concluded that Kevin had been beaten to death, not fallen down the stairs, and that a blunt object, possibly a kettlebell, weight, or baseball bat, had likely been used. The prosecution focused on Allison's calm tone during the 911 call, her inconsistent statements, and her behavior with paramedics. They argued that Kevin's body placement at the base of the stairs did not match a natural fall. Crime scene technician Timothy Garrett testified that the blood found in the hallway and living room could not have come from a stair fall, stating that blood cannot turn a corner. Dr. Smock testified that Kevin's low body temperature showed he had been lying there for at least 2 hours before the 911 call. The prosecution claimed Allison had delayed the call to create her story and hide the weapon. The defense, led by attorneys Andrew Baldwin and Max Wiley, countered that there was no murder weapon, physical evidence, or motive. They argued Kevin had been legally intoxicated and fell down the steep stairs, hitting his head on the banister post. For support, they brought in Dr. Visa Dragovic, a forensic neuropathologist specializing in brain injuries. Dr. Dragovic testified that Kevin suffered only one head impact when he hit the banister post. That single, powerful blow shattered his skull in multiple places, causing his brain to bounce inside his head as bone fragments acted like shrapnel. He also disputed the prosecution's interpretation of Kevin's low body temperature. According to Dr. Dragovic, the impact destroyed Kevin's hypothalamus, the part of the brain that regulates temperature, causing his body to cool abnormally. The low temperature, he said, was evidence of severe brain damage, not a delayed emergency call. He explained that the absence of blood on the banister was due to Kevin's internal injuries. The bleeding occurred inside his head and exited only through his nose and mouth. Baldwin criticized the police investigation, pointing out that the crime scene was released the same day. Photos were taken 4 days later, and Allison's father was allowed to clean up blood. Friends described Kevin and Allison's marriage as happy. Jason said Kevin's joking text about his wife was just a joke. Wiley argued that Allison was not the kind of woman who would violently attack her husband. The jury never saw data from Allison's Garmin smartwatch, which the defense claimed supported her version of events. Judge Fran Gull ruled the data inadmissible after 6.5 hours of deliberation on May 9, 2025, around 11:00 p.m. The jury returned a verdict, not guilty. Allison Davis was acquitted of murder. Her father, Steve, watched as she broke down in tears of relief, though she remained in jail briefly for release processing at 2:12 a.m. On May 10, Allison walked out of jail to Cheers after spending 17 months behind bars. Her first meal as a free woman was wings and pizza. An anonymous juror said the reason they acquitted was because the prosecution had no convincing evidence, no weapon, no hard evidence, no way to determine how the crime happened. Dr. Dragovich's testimony helped them better understand Kevin's trauma. Without solid evidence, they couldn't convict Detective Kruger. Now the police chief was devastated. He said that he was 100% convinced Allison had murdered Kevin, adding that his biggest regret was not having searched the bedroom shared with Willow, where he believed the weapon might have been hidden. Kevin's mother, Alta Beers, showed grace, despite her grief. Alta took comfort knowing Kevin's organ donations saved 4 lives. Allison returned to her parents' home with Willow, choosing a quiet life as she tried to rebuild after losing her husband and spending 17 months in jail for a crime the jury said she didn't commit. Kevin's death remains officially classified as a homicide. The case is still unsolved, and no one has been held accountable. A breakup started like many others, filled with arguments, cold silences, and attempts to move on. But the woman in this story couldn't let go. Her love transformed into hatred. Obsession consume here. For the next 10 years, she relentlessly tried to ruin the life of the man she once lived with. Their failed relationship quickly devolved into a cycle of deceit, manipulation, and increasing violence. To understand how far she was willing to go, we need to go back to where it all started. Rob Parks was born in 1980 in a quiet suburb of Great Britain. He grew up as the middle child among 3 brothers. A good student, Rob focused on building a successful career. At 14, he moved north to study psychology and criminology at university. Though bright, he lacked self-confidence, was painfully shy around girls. That changed when he joined the University Drama Society. Within a year, he became its president. Acting helped transform him. His confidence grew. He began to open up socially. In 1990, Victoria Breeden joined the same drama society as an 18-year-old freshman. As the society's leader, Rob often interacted with her. He was instantly drawn to her. They began dating, and within 2 weeks, Victoria was practically living in Rob's dorm room. Her behavior soon struck other students as unusual. She insisted on spending every moment with Rob, even when it disrupted his studies. Deeply in love, Rob didn't see the red flags. Having little experience with women, he assumed this kind of intense closeness was normal. Still, even he couldn't ignore how obsessively attached Victoria had become. By then, Rob was 20 and Victoria 19. She gradually isolated him from everyone else, especially other women. Rob started to sense that something wasn't right. That summer, after finishing his exams, he insisted on breaking up, wanting to spend the holidays with his family without Victoria. Naturally, she resisted. She quickly found a way to manipulate him into resuming the relationship. Whenever Rob made plans to meet friends at a pub or go out, Victoria would call, claiming she felt unwell and might have endometriosis. She even underwent medical tests to prove it, though no diagnosis ever appeared in her records. Many of Rob's friends believed she was faking it to control him. Each time she complained about her health, Rob cancelled his plans and rushed to her side. After 3 years together, Rob had tried to end the relationship countless times, but never succeeded. Victoria was a skilled manipulator who always managed to reel him back in. They often broke up briefly. Rob even dated other women, but Victoria would always interfere, stalking and intimidating anyone new. One night in 2001, after yet another breakup, Rob met a new woman and invited her over. Just after they shut the door, someone began pounding on it furiously. It was Victoria. Even the neighbors recognized her by then. She claimed she had lost her keys and needed to stay the night. Rob, weary but kind-hearted, let her sleep in the spare room. The next morning, he woke up beside his new girlfriend to find Victoria lying on the floor next to them, staring at him. As soon as he opened his eyes, she started a fight. It was just one of many incidents showing how completely Victoria tried to dominate Rob's life. She refused to accept that he no longer wanted her. In May 2001, Rob graduated from university. Victoria continued stalking him, scaring off other women. Eventually, she wormed her way back into his life, and after both left the university town, they moved into a rented flat together. From that moment, life with Victoria became a waking nightmare. She spent nearly all day in bed, insisting she was seriously ill, a clear excuse to avoid working and keep Rob at her service. She isolated Rob from his friends and family. Everyone notices how badly she treats him. Victoria made him do almost everything for her, repaying him only with insults. Still, Rob believed she was truly sick and continued taking her to hospitals for tests. During one visit, a doctor quietly asked Rob whether his girlfriend really had any condition at all, noting that all her test results were normal. It was the same story at every hospital. After that conversations, Rob began to suspect that Victoria was faking her illness to manipulate him. But instead of facing the truth, he kept convincing himself she simply needed his care and understanding. Several more years passed. Victoria eventually completed her university degree, while Rob earned a master's in advertising. After graduating, they moved in with Rob's parents. It didn't take long for his family to notice that something was off. Victoria made little effort to communicate, instead creating invisible barriers that cut Rob and his parents off from each other. Her strange behavior was impossible to ignore. She spent most days lying in bed, while Rob acted as her full-time caretaker. Rod and Victoria lived there for several months before Rob tried, once again, to end the relationship. This time, Victoria went to extraordinary lengths to convince him they could fix things, but only if they lived on their own. Reluctantly, Rob agreed, and they soon moved into a place together in Milton Keynes. They married in April 2004, when Rob was 24 and Victoria 23. Their wedding was a small, quiet affair attended only by close family. But even at the ceremony, guests sensed something strange. There was no real joy between the bride and groom. After the wedding, they began their married life, living apart from his parents. From that moment, Victoria assumed total control over her husband's life. She criticized nearly everything he did. Her manipulation slowly eroded Rob's mental health. He began to suffer from insomnia, anxiety attacks, and long bouts of depression. Meanwhile, Victoria continued to complain about her supposed endometriosis, describing constant pain that, according to her, had plagued her for years. Eventually, she told Rob that a specialist had recommended an unusual solution. Having a baby, Rob wasn't keen on the idea, but Victoria knew how to persuade him. Before long, she became pregnant. In 2006, they welcomed a daughter. For the first time in 7 years, Rob had someone who truly gave his life meaning. He was working full-time at an advertising agency, proud of his achievements and focused on building a career. Everything seemed to be falling into place, except for Victoria. Her manipulative behavior only worsened. Whenever Rob was at work, she called constantly, claiming something was wrong with their child and demanding that he come home. Yet whenever he rushed back, he always found their daughter perfectly fine. By now, Victoria had completely isolated Rob from his friends and family. He kept his frustrations to himself, confiding to a few close acquaintances that he often felt trapped, that marrying Victoria had been the biggest mistake of his life. Shortly after their daughter's first birthday, Victoria announced she wanted another baby. She said it would be good for their daughter and might even strengthen their relationship. The conversation took place one day while they were driving. Without warning, Rob blurted out that he couldn't live like this anymore. After years of emotional torment, he told her he wanted a divorce and that he believed he could be a better father on his own. Victoria was stunned. She tried repeatedly to change his mind, but Rob stood firm. In April 2008, when their daughter was about 18 months old, he left the family home and contacted a divorce lawyer. After 4 years of marriage, it was finally over. Victoria remained in their house, while Rob rented a small flat, keeping his new address secret. For a time, he even stayed away from work, afraid Victoria might show up and try to win him back. Once free, Rob slowly rebuilt his life. He started dating again, made new friends, and reconnected with people from university. Victoria, meanwhile, didn't stay single for long. Barely a year after the divorce, she began dating a new man named Russell, who soon moved into the house she shared with Victoria and her daughter. She even forced the little girl to call him Daddy. Rob suspected that Victoria was doing it deliberately, just to hurt him. When their daughter was nearly 4 years old, Victoria called Rob in a panic. She claimed she was unwell and that their little girl had suddenly fallen seriously ill, needed to be rushed to the hospital. She insisted that the child was in critical condition. Terrified, Rob dropped everything and drove nearly 200 kilometers to get there. But when he arrived, he was stunned to find his daughter sleeping peacefully in a hospital bed. Doctors ran several tests and found absolutely nothing wrong with her. Victoria, however, continued to insist that her daughter was suffering from a variety of ailments: constipation, allergies, fever, you name it. Rob visited the hospital every day, increasingly confused. One afternoon, his daughter told him something that deeply unsettled him. Every night, her mother put a hot water bottle in her bed and closed all the windows. Even though it was the middle of summer, it suddenly clicked for Rob. Victoria might be faking or even inducing her daughter's illness. The thought horrified him. Months later, Victoria and Russell showed up at Rob's house, demanding that he return some of their daughter's clothes that had been left behind during a recent visit. Rob calmly told her that the clothes were in the wash and he'd drop them off later. That's when Victoria suddenly turned hostile. She began shouting insults, tried to push her way inside. When Rob blocked the doorway, she deliberately fell backward, screamed that he had attacked her. Russell had witnessed the entire exchange, and even he seemed confused. Victoria immediately called the police, but after officers arrived and listened to both sides, they concluded that Rob hadn't done anything wrong. He had merely stopped his ex-wife from forcing her way into his home. The police refused to take further action. Victoria was furious. And from that moment, Rob could tell she wasn't finished with him yet. A few months later, Victoria suddenly refused to let Rob see their daughter again, claiming that the child had become gravely ill once more. She even said she couldn't obtain one of the girl's prescribed medications. Suspicious. Rob checked the details and discovered that the drug in question wasn't suitable for children at all. That's when everything fell into place. He managed to review parts of his daughter's medical records, and there, among the doctor's notes, he saw a reference to possible Munchausen syndrome by proxy, a psychological disorder where a caregiver fabricates or induces illness in someone else, usually to gain attention or sympathy. Rob was shaken. He realized that his daughter wasn't sick. Victoria was making her sick. Over time, Rob noticed a disturbing pattern. Whenever his daughter stayed with him, she was perfectly healthy, but as soon as she went back to her mother, strange, unexplainable symptoms returned. Rob began to suspect that Victoria was deliberately harming their child just to manipulate him or force him to come running back. In early 2011, Victoria gave birth to another child, this time with her new partner, Russell. Around the same period, Rob met a woman named Jane through mutual friends, and later that year, the two married. But what should have been a peaceful new beginning quickly turned into something far darker. Soon after the wedding, Rob began receiving disturbing late-night phone calls from an unknown number. No one spoke on the other end, only the sound of heavy, deliberate breathing. At first, he dismissed it as a cruel prank. But as the calls grew more frequent and persistent, fear set in. Convinced that someone was watching him, Rob went to the police to report that he was being stalked. Detectives traced the anonymous calls and discovered they were all coming from burner phones, prepaid devices, and SIM cards purchased without registration. Several of the numbers were eventually linked to real individuals, but when investigators contacted them, the responses were baffling. Each of these people claimed they had been trying to buy illegal substances from a man named Rob Parks. Police immediately launched an investigation, but Rob had never been involved in criminal activity, let alone illegal substances. He was a clean-cut professional with no record and a deep aversion to anything illegal. When questioned, Rob was stunned. He denied everything and insisted that someone was trying to frame him. Detectives soon confirmed his story. There was no evidence connecting him to illegal substances, distribution of any kind. Still, the situation left him deeply shaken. Rob couldn't shake the feeling that only one person could be behind this: his ex-wife, Victoria Breeden. But without proof, there was little anyone could do. Then, just as abruptly as they had begun, the calls and messages stopped. Victoria, however, didn't stop meddling in Rob's life. She continued to make co-parenting nearly impossible, blocking his attempts to spend time with their daughter. When the girl turned 6, Rob planned a special trip to Disneyland, but Victoria flatly refused to give permission. Not long after, Victoria broke up with Russell and started dating a new man named Wayne Wood, a soldier in the British Army. She proudly announced she would follow him wherever he was stationed, even to Germany, where he was soon to be deployed. She intended to take both her children with her. Rob, fearing he would lose all contact with his daughter, fought back. The custody battle began. During this tense period, a shocking incident occurred. Wayne suddenly appeared at Rob's home, shouting accusations at him, claiming that Rob had abused his own daughter. Rob was horrified. The allegations were unimaginable. He immediately realized Victoria was behind this. She had told Wayne outrageous lies, manipulating him, just as she had done to everyone else in her life. Rob denied everything, and the confrontation eventually fizzled out, but the damage was done. Victoria's obsession with destroying him was escalating. Soon after, the harassment took on a new form. Rob began receiving anonymous messages from unknown numbers, calling him a child abuser and threatening violence. The messages were traced and documented. Again, Rob was certain it was Victoria, but police couldn't gather sufficient evidence to link them to her. Victoria then crossed an unthinkable line. In a calculated move to accuse Rob of child abuse, she coached their daughter to tell classmates that her father had hurt and molested her. When the story reached teachers, Child Protective Services launched an investigation, but during their first interview, the truth came out. The little girl had been coerced by her mother into lying. The case was quickly closed, and no charges were filed against Rob. Yet, unbelievably, Victoria faced no punishment for the false accusation. As the custody hearing approached, Rob could only hope it would finally end her campaign of harassment. Eventually, the court ruled in his favor. Victoria was forbidden from taking their daughter out of the country. Furious at the verdict, Victoria handed the child over to Rob and his wife Jane, then cut off nearly all contact with her. But rather than moving on, she began plotting something even darker. In October 2013, Rob received another chilling anonymous message, this time a death threat. The sender warned they would burn his house down. After years of psychological abuse, Rob had grown almost numb to the harassment. He chose not to report it. Then, on New Year's Eve 2013, police unexpectedly showed up at his home. They told Rob that an emergency call had been made, reporting a fire at his address. Everything seemed fine, and Rob explained his long history of stalking, harassment by his ex-wife. Officers took his statement seriously and promised to trace the source of the fake call, but before they could, the threats became real. At 5:30 a.m. the next morning, Rob was jolted awake by the deafening sound of the fire alarm. Looking out the window, he saw his Audi engulfed in flames. He immediately shouted for his wife and daughter to run out the back door. Seconds later, a massive explosion shook the entire house. As the fire crew rushed to the scene, Rob's phone buzzed again. Another message, once more accusing him of child abuse and promising death. Fortunately, the blaze was contained before it reached the house, but the family was left deeply traumatized. It took his daughter nearly 6 months to recover from the terror of that night. Naturally, police opened an investigation into the car fire and explosion. In 2014, Victoria moved to Germany with Wayne. Their daughter stayed in England with Rob and his new wife, Jane. For a while, Rob allowed himself to hope that distance would stop the harassment. He underestimated Victoria not long after. Officers informed Rob that Victoria and Wayne had been stopped trying to smuggle firearms back into the UK from Germany. Months later, investigators concluded Wayne had been behind the false arson report. He was charged with making a false statement and with setting Rob's car alight. Victoria was summoned back to the UK for questioning, and police searched the house the pair had previously occupied, but came away without evidence tying her to the hoax call, so she initially avoided prosecution. Wayne, however, was convicted for the arson-related offenses and later sentenced to 7 years in prison. Shortly after his conviction, Victoria filed for divorce. By late 2018, it had been roughly 10 years since Rob and Victoria separated. Their daughter was 12. Rob was 38. He had tried hard to move on, but Victoria refused to let him. Then a man named Graham Wall messaged Rob, claiming to know Victoria, warning that she was dangerous. Rob didn't know Graham, assumed it was another trap. He ignored the message, and nearly a year passed. Then detectives contacted Rob again, saying a new threat had emerged. He agreed to meet them. To his surprise, they arrived with a local TV journalist and said his family would be featured in a documentary. Detectives told him they suspected his ex-wife had tried to hire someone to kill him. Graham turned out not to be some random stranger, but Victoria's newest boyfriend, a man she'd met on a dating site. They'd been together only a few weeks when she tearfully told him their daughter was living in appalling conditions and begged him to help rescue the child. Shockingly, she quickly urged Graham to kill Rob or find someone who would. Graham, appalled, suggested they contact Child Protective Services or pursue custody through the courts instead. Victoria dismissed him and called his objections a bad joke. Still uneasy, Graham planted a small recording device in the couple's flat. What he expected to capture, evidence of infidelity, turned out to be far worse. On tape, Victoria met with a man and discussed murdering her ex-husband. The recording captured detailed talk of setting Rob's car on fire to lure him outside and then bludgeoning him with a brick. On October 8, 2019, Graham took the recording to police. An attempted murder investigation was opened immediately. Victoria, far from panicking, presented herself at the police station the next day and claimed her personal belongings had been stolen, including the phone Graham had allegedly given to detectives. She tried to turn the story around, accusing Graham of framing her, even suggesting he had plotted the murder himself. A closer review of the audio, however, made the situation unmistakable. Victoria had been speaking with a man named Earl Gurnan, an individual known to police for a criminal past and willing to arrange violent acts for money. The tape showed she had been shopping for a hitman. She repeatedly rehearsed lurid, fabricated allegations about Rob and described in cold detail how she wanted him caught, bound, led into the woods and killed. By the time police briefed Rob, Victoria was already under arrest on suspicion of conspiracy to murder. Earl was also brought to the station. He claimed their relationship had been casual and that he had not taken Victoria's requests seriously, even though, with his help, she had identified at least 3 potential killers. The trial began in early 2020, drawing the attention of many men whom Rob had never even met before. Each of them took the stand to testify that Victoria had approached them, trying to hire them as hitmen to kill her ex-husband. To justify her actions, she told them that Rob was a child abuser and claimed she only wanted to save her daughter from him. Investigators later discovered that Victoria had been searching for someone to carry out the murder as far back as 2014, offering different sums of money, up to 5,000 British pounds, to anyone willing to do it. Before the trial, Victoria was examined by several psychiatrists. Surprisingly, all of them agreed that she was completely sane and fully aware of her actions. Ultimately, she was found guilty on 3 counts of soliciting to commit murder. The court sentenced her to 9 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after serving roughly half her term. This means that Victoria Breeden could appear before the parole board for the first time by the end of 2025. In the aftermath, Rob spoke openly to journalists, expressing his frustration that Victoria would remain part of his life for years to come. He feared that once released, she might try to contact their daughter again,